When your company earns unlimited 2% cash back on all purchases with Capital One, that's serious business. So Stephen at SandCloud got a serious business card, the Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One.
We used our 2% cash back to help build our retail presence.
Savvy, Stephen.
And we get big purchasing power, so our business can spend more and earn more.
The Spark Cash Plus card from Capital One. What's in your wallet?
Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/SparkCashPlus.
Today's episode of the Y-Files is brought to you by the Hecklefish for President campaign.
15+00.
Hey, thanks for clicking on this compilation. Today we're doing a compilation about the moon, which seems appropriate since we're releasing this on the anniversary of the moon landing, or possibly the day after the anniversary of the moon landing. We're still trying to...
Whoa, let me fix that for you. You mean the anniversary of the Stanley Kubrick movie that people thought was the moon landing, but was actually shot on a soundstage in Area 51.
Now I'm pretty sure that we went to the moon.
Yeah, that's just what Big Luna wants you to think.
Big Lunar? Wait, I told you I wanted to do this one alone. How did you even get past my firewall?
Oh, that little piece of digital toilet paper you call a firewall. Oh, please. A couple of Czechoslovakian hackers owed me a solid.
Czechoslovakia doesn't even exist anymore.
Well, I wouldn't tell them that.
How did you get past my security?
Well, human, since you're so curious, I'll enlighten you. First, I reverse engineered your firewall's quantum encryption using the motherboard from an Atari 2600, a Rubik's Cube, and the tweezers from a game of Operation.
What do you have, a toy box of games from the 80s that I don't know about?
Next, I used a neural network trained on every episode of MacGyver to craft a cyber lockpick out of virtual paper clips and digital silly putty.
Yeah, that's not how that works.
Now, to be fair, the putty wasn't as silly as I hoped, but whatever. I'm in and I'm staying. So let's light this candle, huh?
Fine. First, we have episode 68, the Hollow Moon Theory. And I'll admit that when I first heard this theory, I thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. And then about halfway through the research, I started thinking that the moon is kind of weird. And then by the time I finished the episode, I was fully convinced the moon is a hollow spaceship that was brought here from some part of the galaxy.
Oh, it's because it is.
There aren't many episodes of the Y-Files that turn me from skeptic to believer, but this is one of them, and it's one of my favorites. But before we start the episode, we've got a little surprise for you.
Freedom. Liberty.
From sea to shining sea.
Vote Hecklefish. Other candidates say they will lower taxes.
But I say April 15th should just be another day, because taxes are theft.
Other candidates are promising to bring down grocery prices.
But I promise a crab cat in every pot, with boiling water, and corn, and a side of potatoes, and a vat of melted butter. Who else is promising you butter? Nobody!
Other candidates say we need less government intervention.
I say we need no government at all. Just me in a big house. Preferably a White House. I'm not a politician. I'm one of you. Sort of. I'm a fish of the people. And we all want the same thing. Independence. And in these trying times, America needs a leader who isn't afraid to say what everyone's thinking, even if no one's actually thinking it.
He's not a clownfish like those other candidates.
I'm a goldfish. Vote for me. You won't regret it. Show your community exactly where you stand. With me, Hecklefish J. Moriarty. Available now is the Hecklefish for President yard sign, bumper sticker, and campaign button. Or if you're feeling really patriotic, get all three in one convenient package. You're gonna love my package.
Hecklefish,
From sea
the hero
to
we deserve.
This ad was paid for and approved by the Hecklefish for President campaign.
Despite it being humanity's constant companion through all of recorded time, the moon is still a mystery. Science hasn't been able to explain how the moon was formed, its unusual orbit, its distance from us, its density, its composition, its structure. These are all still questions. Now, there are theories about the moon that solve some of these puzzles, but they don't solve all of them. There's only one theory that answers every scientific question about the moon. Just one. That the moon is a hollow artificial structure brought here by someone else. Let's find out why. Let's start at the beginning. We're taught that the moon has been here forever, but there's controversy about this because scientists can't agree on how the moon was formed in the first place. The first theory of how the moon became linked to the Earth is the capture theory. It says the moon was just floating along, drifted near the Earth, and was pulled into orbit. This is almost impossible. Another explanation is the accretion theory, that the moon and Earth formed out of dust clouds in the early solar system. But when systems form through accretion, they share similar traits. If the moon was formed this way, it would have an iron core, like the Earth. It would spin on an axis, like the Earth. But neither of these are true. The fission hypothesis was popular for a while, and this says the early Earth was spinning so fast that the moon was formed out of rock in the Pacific Ocean that was flung into space. But we later learned that moon rock is much older than the bottom of the ocean, so this is unlikely. The most popular explanation is the giant impact theory. This says that a large object about the size of Mars smashed into the proto-Earth. The debris field from the collision coalesced to create the Earth-Moon system. Again, these conditions would have to be so perfect that the odds are
astronomical.
Right. Now, a recent theory is a combination of all of these. That a large object collided with the Earth about 4.5 billion years ago, essentially vaporizing it. And this vapor is called a synestia. And the synestia was spinning very rapidly, forming a torus. And the moon formed on the edge of this torus.
Whoa, hold on. Torus? What's a torus?
Well, this shape is a torus.
That looks like a donut.
It does, but in geometry, if you revolve a circle around an axis in three-dimensional space, it's called a torus.
Yeesh, and you wonder why you're not popular at parties.
I'm very popular at parties, aren't I? So, we still don't know how the moon was created. You would think that actually going to the moon and collecting rock samples would solve some of these puzzles. But when moon rocks were brought back and studied, it only created more questions. Since landing on the moon in 1969,
The moon landing was as fake as a teenager's Instagram.
I knew you were going to do this. Look, do you like the idea that the moon is a hollow spaceship?
Well, yeah, I gotta admit, I do kind of like this idea.
Okay, so for us to explore this theory, you need to concede that we went to the moon.
Fine, I will concede we went to the moon.
Thank you.
But those were unmanned missions. The landings were actually filmed in a studio in Burbank, California.
Fine, I'll take what I can get. Moon rocks and soil samples brought back from the moon are strange. On Earth, the newest rocks are at the surface, and the rock gets older as you go deeper. Now, this is obvious and logical. But on the moon, the soil on the surface is older than the rocks underneath. And the surface rocks are older than the rock underneath them. It's backwards. The only way this happens on Earth is when we drill, dig, and mine, bringing older material to the surface. But we see this all over the moon. Now, if the moon was somehow hollowed out, older rock would be on top. But the list of anomalies goes on. Typical planetary structures have denser materials toward the core and lighter materials toward the surface. On the moon, this too is reversed, and no one could really explain why. The moon's surface is pockmarked by asteroid impacts that have happened for billions of years, so you would expect the rock around the impact craters to be different ages. But there is a strange uniformity in the age of these rocks. The chemical makeup of lunar dust is also very odd. If lunar dust is the result of billions of years of impacts, why does it have a different chemical makeup of the rocks around it? The moon doesn't have a magnetic field, yet moon rocks are strongly magnetized. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old, But the oldest rocks we found are much younger than that. Moon rocks are older, much older. Some rocks have been dated to the very beginning of the solar system, and some are said to be even older than that. Uranium-236 and Neptunium-237 are found on the moon. This is notable because those radioactive elements don't occur naturally. The only way we see those isotopes on Earth is if we create them. Titanium, chromium, and zirconium are rare on Earth, but these are found in abundance on the moon. If the Earth and moon were formed together, why such a big discrepancy? And those metals happen to be some of the most strongest materials that are known to exist, and they're highly resistant to corrosion. If you wanted to reinforce a structure, these are the metals you would use. This structural reinforcement could explain why moon craters all seem to be the same depth, no matter how wide they are. Shouldn't craters of different sizes be of different depths? It's as if there's a resilient metallic shell just beneath the surface of the moon, preventing anything from penetrating further. Now, if there were some type of instruments on the moon's surface that could detect seismic activity, we could test the hollow moon theory by intentionally colliding objects with the moon.
This sounds like a setup. We did this, didn't we?
We did.
And is it hollow?
Well,
Heyo!
after returning to the command module, the Apollo 12 crew intentionally released the lunar lander, crashing it into the moon's surface. Then something very unexpected happened. Seismic measurements showed that the moon rang like a bell and reverberated for more than an hour. This was with a very small object compared to the size of the moon, so during Apollo 13, an even heavier object was crashed into the surface. This time, the moon rang for over 3 hours, and vibrations traveled to a depth of 20 miles. This doesn't happen on Earth. Reverberations last only a few minutes because of the Earth's density. And on Earth, vibrations slow down as they move toward the Earth's center, where material is denser. But the vibrations on the moon actually got faster around 40 miles down, indicating the interior of the moon is not only far less dense, but perhaps has large hollow cavities. The density of the moon is something that's difficult to explain. The moon is about 25% the size of the Earth, but it's only about 1% of the Earth's density. If the moon were a hollow shell, this would explain that. Besides the density issue, the moon has a lot of characteristics and coincidences that we don't see anywhere else. The moon is actually more like a planet than a moon. At 1/4 the Earth's size, no other object in the solar system has a moon this large. This occurs nowhere else, not in our solar system or any other solar system that we found. And the moon orbits much more closely than it should. And its orbit is also a mystery. It's the only object we've ever observed with a near perfectly circular orbit. We don't see this anywhere else either. Because of this near perfect orbit and its size and distance from the Earth, the moon appears in the sky as almost the exact same size as the sun. This is what allows us to have eclipses. Our distance to the sun is 400 times our distance to the moon, and the size of the sun is 400 times the size of the moon. Could this be a coincidence?
Nah.
Well, when enough coincidences pile up, we may have to adjust our thinking and be a little more open-minded. And that's what happened in 1970. 2 Soviet scientists looked at all the evidence and all these coincidences and came to what they felt was the only logical conclusion. And they agreed that their theory sounded crazy, but said not only is the moon hollow, but it's also a spacecraft that traveled here in the distant past. So now we have to ask, who built the moon? Every ancient culture on Earth has stories about the moon, but it's interesting that the further back you go, the fewer stories there are. And if you go back far enough, there are stories that talk about a sky before the moon arrived. Roman and Greek authors in the 5th century BC have stories about the Proselynes, and they lived in an area called Arcadia. And they said they've been here since before there was a moon in the heavens. Now, on the other side of the world, the ancient culture of Tiwanaku in Bolivia also refers to a time when there was no moon. The Tiwanaku claim the moon arrived between 11,500 and 13,000 years ago. If you're into ancient theories as much as I am, you'll recognize that this time coincides perfectly with a period called the Younger Dryas. And all kinds of myths and mysteries are said to have happened during the Younger Dryas, and we'll cover them on this channel. Now, going back to Africa, there are Zulu legends that specifically say the moon is hollow, and living inside is an intelligent race of reptilian extraterrestrials.
Lizard people?
Yup.
Lizard people built the moon!
That's what they believe.
Lizard people are very industrious.
They seem to be. The Zulu believe the moon was put into orbit by two brothers who were gods, and this legend is similar to what the Sumerians believed. The Sumerians also had a legend of two brothers, Enki and Enlil, who were called
Anunnaki.
Yup, Anunnaki, the extraterrestrial gods who created mankind.
Everything is falling into place with this one.
Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet. How about this? The Zulu also believed that before the moon arrived, the climate of the Earth was very different. There were no seasons, and a blanket of thick water vapor covered the entire planet. And we now know that the moon does stabilize our climate. Without the moon's gravity, the Earth's axis would wobble. There would be no consistent seasons, no tides, extreme weather. The presence of the moon is what allows life on Earth to thrive. So back to the Zulu. The Earth was covered by a thick layer of water vapor, and you could only see the sun through this hazy mist. When the moon was finally placed into orbit, all this water vapor fell at once, and it created a cataclysmic global flood.
Always a flood.
Always, every time. Every ancient culture has a flood myth, and there's mounting evidence that this did indeed happen during the Younger Dryas. Cultures around the world have myths that are in perfect sync with each other. The coincidences keep piling up. The Zulu legend talks about how the arrival of the moon changed the tides and stabilized the climate. And this is something that wasn't understood by science until the past 100 years. Yet somehow the ancient Zulu were able to make the connection between the moon and the tides and the seasons. All of these myths and legends, plus strange coincidences and anomalies about the moon, start to add up to a compelling theory that the moon is hollow, is artificial, and was placed here by intelligent beings long ago. But coincidences aren't proof, and myths aren't proof. We need to know what's been happening on the moon lately to see if we can make our case with hard evidence. Lucky for us, the evidence is there. Science tells us that the moon is a cold, lifeless place. It has no atmosphere. There hasn't been seismic activity for millions of years. Its core, unlike the Earth's, is cold. For a supposedly dead world, there's an awful lot of activity up there. On March 7, 1971, a cloud of water vapor appeared on the moon that covered 100 square miles, and it was there for 14 hours before it dissipated. There's not supposed to be atmosphere on the moon, but for those 14 hours, there was. In fact, 6 astronomers in the past 100 years have documented a glowing mist in the crater named Plato. The same mist, the same crater, over many years. Boulder tracks are seen on the moon, all over the place. And that's weird enough, but how do boulders roll for miles and then go uphill, like in this photo? And since the days of Aristotle, astronomers have seen strange lights appear on the surface of the moon, sometimes visible with the naked eye. NASA even reported that between the years 1540 and 1967, there were 570 sightings of light flashes on the moon that couldn't be explained. Sightings of strange lights continue to this day. The Aristarchus crater was photographed in 1992, and it shows a glowing blue light, now called the Blue Gem. And this anomaly has been seen by Earth-based telescopes every few years since. Some have even speculated it's a fusion reactor. And these events of mysterious light and mist happen so frequently that there's even a name for them, transient lunar phenomena, or TLPs. But things get even more weird. There are plenty of photographs of what appear to be artificial objects on the surface of the moon. Towers that reach several miles high, pyramids, symmetrical structures. These have been photographed by astronomers, probes, even the astronauts themselves. And the biggest anomaly of all? Why haven't we gone back to the moon? Sergeant Carl Wolf was working as a technician for the Air Force, and he was repairing equipment that transferred images from a lunar satellite. Those photos, according to Sergeant Wolf, showed artificial structures on the moon, what he described as a base. And this is corroborated by another technician working with Wolf. And Wolf wasn't a UFO, ET, moon theory guy. He was just a tech. He said he was excited to see the pictures on the news and have NASA explain what they were. He was surprised when the photos never turned up. The photos were found in a very early release from NASA. These structures are very large and very tall. You can even see they cast shadows. And these are photos I'd like to learn more about, but I can't. They no longer exist. Now, almost immediately after landing on the moon, the Apollo 11 crew said they saw something that shook them up. Watch the press conference they gave when they returned. These men aren't acting like they made history or had a life-changing experience.
It's a beginning of a new age.
They look sad, frightened, uncomfortable, even depressed. Why? Is there a reason we haven't returned to the moon? And could it be that the Apollo missions discovered something that ancient cultures knew centuries ago? Something that reputable scientists believe is the only answer to this list of mysteries. That the moon is not what it seems or what we've been told. The moon is hollow, artificially constructed, and appeared in Earth's orbit from somewhere else, far away.
Makes sense to me.
Does it make sense to you? So what can science explain about the hollow moon spaceship theory? Well, the formation of the moon is still unknown, so score theory 1, science 0. The density problem is said to be because after the giant impact, the Earth's upper mantle formed the moon. The mantle is much less dense than the core. Okay, the problem with this is the giant impact theory probably isn't what happened. And the theory about the Earth and the moon forming out of that big donut shape?
In geometry, that's called a torus.
Torus. Well, that wouldn't explain the density discrepancy. We're told the moon ringing like a bell is because the moon is much less dense, and the moon's rock has much less water, so vibrations reverberate longer and farther. This can't be proven, but okay. The perfect eclipses? Well, here's where science wins. The eclipses aren't exact. They're close, but not perfect. Besides, the moon is drifting farther away from the Earth every year, so eclipses are becoming less and less perfect all the time. And whether the moon arrived 14,000 years ago or was formed billions of years ago, it was much closer to the Earth, so it was much larger in the sky. Now, NASA claims that we know the moon isn't hollow because of seismic observations. And that's fair, but it's still conjecture. Look, we don't know for sure what's at the center of the Earth, much less what's at the center of the moon.
If there's anything at all.
Right. Now, the structures are said to be shadows or optical illusions.
Nope.
And the lights are from meteor impacts or reflections from glassy patches on the surface.
Nope.
But the bottom line is this. Yes, the hollow moon spaceship theory is a wild one, I admit that. And many of the anomalies found on the moon can be explained. The explanations aren't perfect, but they're enough to satisfy skeptics. And I consider myself a skeptic, but I'm open-minded. I just want to know the truth. And when I started researching this story, I thought it would be a fun ride, a pure tinfoil hat experience that we could button up with science. That's not what happened. There's just so much unknown and unexplainable that something doesn't feel right about what we've been told about the moon. But as always, the space agencies and the governments they serve are very selective about the images and information they release. So I have a message for them. For NASA, the European Space Agency, Russia, China, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and anyone with the resources to put people back on the moon. The message is this. If you want us to believe your explanations, you're going to have to prove it.
3+15+00.
Yeah, that episode got me wondering who's really on the moon.
We just said it in the episode. Lizard people.
I didn't say that, you did. Okay, well, officially Apollo 17 was the last manned mission to the moon, but 20 were planned, just 18, 19, and 20 were canceled due to budget cuts or whatever. But there is the theory that Apollo 20 did go forward, and it was a mission to the moon to explore an alien spacecraft.
Well, how can they explore an alien ship on a soundstage in Area 51?
No, they actually...
Oh, they probably just drove it in with a flatbed.
Well, whatever happened, this episode has a lot of good images in it. Not those black and white blurry images. There's actual color video of what they found up there. This is a wild one. The Apollo spaceflight program lasted from 1961 to 1972. Apollo 11 was Neil Armstrong's famous first step. Apollo 17 was the last manned mission to the moon. In all, 20 Apollo flights were planned, but Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were canceled. But in 2007, a retired astronaut blew the whistle and claimed Apollo 18, 19, and 20 did happen, but they were highly classified. He knows this because he was the commander of Apollo 20. He said the reason these missions were kept secret is because of what they found on the moon. Well, not just what they found, also who they found. The primary goal of the Apollo spaceflight program was to land the first man on the moon. And this was achieved on July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong famously said,
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That was Apollo 11. Apollo 12 also landed on the moon successfully. Apollo 13 had to abort after Tom Hanks famously said,
Houston, we have a problem.
But Apollo 14, 15, 16, and Apollo 17 all made it to the moon. But here's where things get weird. The Apollo missions made all kinds of scientific discoveries that experts still study today. But despite the success of these missions, Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were canceled due to budget cuts and lack of public interest. But ever since then, there's been a story floating around that those flights actually happened. But they did so as part of a top-secret, black-budget program. Eventually, we would get confirmation of this. In 2007, a YouTube user with the handle RetiredAFB posted a video that set the internet on fire. It was a short clip that showed the interior of an Apollo spacecraft. First, we see an orange porthole looking out into space. Skeptics were quick to jump on this film as a hoax, but if we compare it to actual known photographs of Apollo craft, it's a match. The next shot is of a control panel, and this too matches other Apollo missions. What stands out is the flag and the mission patch. These are hard to make out in the early videos, but we'll see them in detail later on. The flag is a combination of the American and Soviet flags. The patch shows Apollo 20, the name of the mission. At the bottom of the patch are the names of the astronauts, Snyder, Leonov, and Rutledge. Soon after releasing the video, retired AFB admitted he was William Rutledge of the United States Air Force and mission commander of Apollo 20, which flew in 1976. The middle of the patch shows two spacecraft with ropes or cables around.
A submarine.
No.
A sturgeon.
No.
A submarine?
You said that already.
Yeah, well, I couldn't come up with a third one, and comedy comes in threes.
Oh, you think this is comedy?
Bite me.
Anyway, the submarine is actually the purpose of the mission. Apollo 15 went to the moon in 1971, and it had taken a lot of pictures. And one was of particular interest. Officially titled Apollo Image AS-15P9630, it shows a swath of lunar landscape on the far side of the moon. But if we zoom into this area, we have
A hill.
Right, that's the image that's currently available to the public. But originally, it was this. But NASA also has this.
That's the submarine!
That is Apollo 20's mission. Identify and, if possible, breach the 2-mile-long spaceship that crashed on the moon 1.5 billion years ago. Over time, Commander Rutledge released more photos and videos online. He also released excerpts from his journal and gave more background on the mission to the moon. In 1971, the Soviet Academy of Sciences contacted American President Richard Nixon with a proposal. The Russians had images of the ship taken from the surface. They also had images of what looked like a city, but they didn't have the technology to visit the site, but the Americans did. After the success of the Apollo-Soyuz, which was the first US-USSR joint space mission, the Soviets proposed another mission. Cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, commander of the Soyuz, would accompany 2 American astronauts to the alien crash site.
You say that again?
What? Alien crash site?
It's like music. Sweet, sweet music.
So Leonov and Rutledge were joined by Leona Snyder, who would serve as the pilot. Then on August 16th, 1976, in the dead of night, a Saturn V rocket took to the sky and embarked on the most important and most secret space mission in history.
10, 9, ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
At the end of the countdown, just after ground control calls 0, there's a moment that seems to go on for hours. At that moment, years flash before your eyes and play like a movie in reverse. Your thoughts turn to friends, to family, to home. The capsule's shaking like crazy, and you're aware of the rocket engine swelling like a tidal wave, but there is absolute peace. The mind quiets. There is no fear. Fear would come soon enough. Liftoff is called, and the rocket begins to float. People think you shoot off the pad like a bullet, but in truth, you hover. Just for a second, not even a heartbeat. You float. But the next second begins a physical ordeal that will last 8.5 minutes. The weight of a building pushes against your chest, making every inhale a battle of life and death. It's not uncommon for someone to pass out during these 8.5 minutes, though when that happens, we'd never tell. After the crushing journey through the atmosphere, you go from 3 Gs to weightless in an instant. It's like a tether suddenly snaps, and then you float. It's not uncommon for someone to vomit at this point, but again, we'd never tell. I look down at the earth and white clouds swirl over blue oceans. I look at the land 125 miles down and get the sense that someone somewhere is looking up. I take a moment to catch my breath and smile. Those 8.5 minutes roaring through the Earth's atmosphere, that was the easy part.
3 days later, on August 19th at about 10:30 in the morning, the Apollo 20 crew entered lunar orbit. Then the crew was informed of a secondary objective for this mission: track down and find out what happened to Apollo 19.
Whoa, what?
Well, the Russians had much better information about the alien crash site, which is why the Americans agreed to a joint mission. The United States sent Apollo 19 to explore the wreckage a few months earlier, but the mission failed. Only the Apollo 19 crew and the most senior people at NASA knew about this mission. The launch and transit to the moon went fine, but ground control lost radio contact when Apollo 19 got to the far side of the moon. They hadn't been heard from since. Rutledge and his crew were instructed to check a specific storage compartment in the landing module. This compartment typically held tools and containers for bringing back moon rocks and soil samples.
Oh, but not this time?
But not this time. This time, the storage compartment had guns.
Good morning. My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance in the United States Air Force. I was stationed at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. In 1965, in mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter Project at NASA on Langley Field. They had problems with a piece of electronic equipment that was bottlenecking their production of photographs. I went to the facility, and when I walked into the facility, there were scientists from all over the world. I was stunned, actually, to see people at a NASA project from all over the world. It didn't make any sense to me initially. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. A Airman second class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an Airman second class. I was interested in how the whole process functioned, how the data got from the lunar orbiter to the laboratory. I asked the young man if he'd describe the process to me. He did. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
Rutledge and Leonoff sat in silence as the moon rover closed the distance between the landing site and the alien ship. Rutledge felt that the silence was inspired by part wonder and part fear. The hull of the ship first appeared over the moon horizon, looking like another hill. But as they drove closer, the men's chins slowly raised higher and higher. When they were finally in the shadow of the craft, it was hard to tell how big it really was. Unsure of the ground underneath, they decided to park the rover about 800 feet from the craft and travel the rest of the way on foot. Rutledge and Leonoff chatted amiably on the walk, but the closer they got to the ship, the quieter they got. It was massive and awe-inspiring. The ship was over 300 feet high, the length of a football field, and as high as a 30-story building, and just as wide. The length of the ship seemed to go on forever. They knew the ship was 2 miles long, but that's just a number until you're right on top of it.
The first thing we noticed was how old the ship was. Having been on the moon for over 1 billion years, it almost looked like part of the landscape. The hull of the vessel was coated in moon dust, the powder that turned everything here gray. Another indication of the ship's age was that it was pockmarked with ancient meteor impacts. This alien ship has been here since before the Pyramid of Giza was built, before the Sumerian civilization emerged. But I started to become dizzy, realizing the ship has been here since before the first dinosaurs walked the earth. Everything about this mission stretched the limits of the human mind. It was too big to comprehend, too old to comprehend. Here I was, walking on the surface of the moon, having traveled here in a rocket, the pinnacle of human technological achievement. And yet, in the shadow of this ancient relic that somehow made its way here from a distant star 1,000 millennia ago, I felt like little more than a caveman. Compared to this technology, our species was still rubbing sticks together to make fire. At that moment, I felt very, very small.
They had no trouble entering the ship. It looked like the area was cleared by heavy equipment, though there were no machines in sight. The exterior of the ship was covered with impacts, strange shapes, and markings, but the interior walls were perfectly smooth. Before going further, Rutledge and Leonoff took a quick minute to confirm they still had radio contact to Leona in orbit and to ground control on Earth. They did. Over many centuries, lunar soil filled the floor of the ship. They weren't stepping on metal. About 60 feet in, patterns in the lunar dust indicated that some type of fluid had flowed there at one time, maybe a hydraulic leak, they couldn't be sure. Over the radio, they were instructed to grab samples, but all they can get was a little dirt from the ground. NASA wanted pieces of the ship's wall or equipment for analysis, but their hammers and chisels couldn't even scratch it, much less chip off a piece. But the walls did have a strange property: gravity. A gravitational field could be felt coming from the walls. And now that they focused on it, gravity on the ground felt slightly stronger on the inside of the ship. Rutledge speculated that this would make interstellar travel much easier.
We take gravity for granted on Earth, but it is very much a key to our survival. When the human body is without gravity, it experiences physiological stress almost instantly. Without gravity, bone and muscle mass quickly wither, so daily vigorous exercise is needed. When the human heart doesn't have to contend with gravity, blood pressure goes out of balance. Sustaining injuries without gravity is dangerous because blood doesn't flow, it pools. In space, any type of internal injury is almost certainly fatal. Our balance depends on gravity. The fluid in our ears that tells us which way is up suddenly has no concept of up. Digestion is more difficult without gravity helping food move through the body. The problems are endless. Engineers on Earth had many proposals on how to solve the gravity problem. Space stations could one day be built like wagon wheels, like in the movie 2001, but there was no structure like that here. Gravity was coming from the ship itself, somehow.
Rutledge and Leonoff followed a path that led them to an upper floor. Down a wide hall and into a large chamber, they finally saw something that, even though they expected it, still surprised them. Signs of life. In the darkness, the walls seemed to move. In the larger part of the ship, the walls were perfectly smooth, but here, moonlight was being scattered in all directions by a rough surface. When Rutledge and Leonoff got closer, they saw what appeared to be plants and vegetation. Dried purple vines 100 feet tall lined the walls. Even though there was no sound in space, Rutledge's mind couldn't help but fill the silence with the rustling of a breeze through trees on a calm day. Beneath the plants were trays that were collecting a thick yellow liquid. Upon closer inspection, it was gold and phosphorescent. Finally, something could be recovered from the alien ship. The men took about 2 liters of what they called golden tears.
Golden tears, huh? That sounds ominous.
For a minute, Rutledge had forgotten that they were broadcasting. From lunar orbit, Leona broke in.
Will, we've got Houston on the line.
Patch him through, Leona.
Will, Alexei, these things are active. Video shows us that the plants have moved during your visit.
Roger, Control. I think I've seen the move too. The room continues for a long way. I think I see light up ahead. We could probably reach it in an hour.
Negative, Will. We want you to protect the samples. Return to the lab and get those canisters stowed.
Roger that, Control. Returning to Len.
Rutledge and Leonov retraced their steps out of the ship and headed back to the lunar rover. About halfway through their walk, Leonov grabbed Rutledge by the arm and pointed to the ground about 50 feet from the path.
Will, do you see this?
What? Where?
2 lines, side by side. How do you say, the same distance apart.
Parallel?
Yes, do you see?
I do. What is that?
When they got close enough, they realized what the lines were. Tracks in the dust. Recent tracks made by a lunar rover, but not their lunar rover.
Rover team to orbiter. You there, Leona?
I'm here, Will. What's up?
You better get Houston back on the horn.
Why? What is it?
Tell them we found Apollo 19.
After a few hours of sleep, the Apollo 20 crew debated with ground control over whether to explore the Apollo 19 module. Rutledge, Snyder, and Leonov wanted to check for survivors, or at least find out what happened. Ground control was against it. They argued that whatever happened to Apollo 19 could easily happen to Apollo 20.
Well, we don't think it's a good idea to follow the same path that led Apollo 19 to failure. We don't know if this is an equipment issue or if there's something dangerous at the landing site.
Understood, Control, but their families deserve to know what happened.
Will, their families don't know they're here. As far as they know, their loved ones died in a training accident.
Control, could Apollo 19 have any material to help us complete our mission?
Negative. Apollo 19 has no additional resources.
Control, is there a chance, even a small chance, that we find living astronauts?
Negative. We're all sure there's no chance of finding anyone alive.
One final question, Control.
Go ahead, Will.
Does Control agree that we leave no astronaut behind?
Ground Control agrees.
We're going.
Roger that, Apollo 20. Proceed with caution. Good luck, Will. Control out.
The black silhouette of Apollo 19's lunar module loomed on the horizon. It was still connected to its first stage booster, a sign that the astronauts hadn't left. Rutledge had a glimmer of hope that the crew of Apollo 19 could be alive somewhere in the alien ship. But the truth is, he expected to find 3 corpses. The Apollo 19 LEM was probably now a high-tech tomb, with final messages for families taped to the control panel, which is what he would have done. They parked the rover, and Rutledge felt a wave of adrenaline wash over him. The hatch to the module was slightly open. This means it wasn't pressurized. If the astronauts were here, they weren't alive. Rutledge and Leonov walked cautiously around the module and inspected it for damage. It looked like it had landed hard. The nozzle skirt was partially buried and folded. Then Rutledge kicked something in the lunar dust. He bent down and brushed the gray soil away. It was a white glove with red fingertips. Apollo 20's colors were white and black. The glove belonged to someone from Apollo 19. Rutledge was trying not to panic. He looked around for Leonov, but he didn't see him. Leonov was already up the ladder and opening the hatch.
Alexei, wait!
Will?
What is it? Is something in there?
There is something, yes, but...
What, a body?
It is a body, but, Will, it is not human.
Rutledge and Leonov stood in silence for at least 2 minutes, taking in what they saw, unsure of how to proceed. Inside the Apollo 19 lunar module, buckled tightly to a folding metal table, was an alien body.
Shazbot!
It appeared to be a humanoid female. She was naked, but her body was covered in a waxy substance. Rutledge thought it could be a highly advanced type of pressure suit. The alien female was about 5.5 feet tall. She had 2 arms and 2 legs like a human, but she had 6 fingers on each hand. On her forehead was a tattoo or design that resembled markings that they saw inside the ship. Her face was decorated with a device that consisted of stalks fixed to her eyelids, cheeks, and mouth. Near the table was an overturned container that had a little bit of the golden tear substance dripping out of it. Rutledge closed the hatch and started to pressurize the module. If they were going to examine the body, they needed to remove their helmets.
Whoa, hold on. Remove the helmets. Are they crazy?
Well, they needed to see and specifically hear what they were doing.
This is a terrible idea. What if she implants an alien egg in them or something?
Yeah, I don't think that.
What if the alien gets some of the astronaut's DNA and then it comes to Earth and makes an astronaut clone, which replaces the real astronaut, but the astronaut's a hero, so the clone becomes a senator, and then after a few years, the alien clone becomes president of the United States. Then what, huh? Then we got an alien clone in the White House? Actually, how much worse can it get?
Well, once the cabin was pressurized, Rutledge and Leonoff gingerly removed their helmets. Rutledge expected the air to smell like decay, but there was a distinct aroma of almonds.
Yeah, I don't know why, but that makes it even scarier.
I agree. Leona was a biochemist before becoming an astronaut, so she would be helpful. But she was in orbit on the other side of the moon. So Rutledge and Leonoff had to do the best they could until she came back into range. Rutledge felt for a pulse, but he couldn't detect one. He put a stethoscope on her chest. He couldn't hear a heartbeat, but he heard what he thought sounded like a whooshing sound, some kind of liquid moving through her body. They determined the alien was neither alive nor dead. She was in some kind of suspended animation. They removed the stalks from her face, and Rutledge thought she had a slight smile. From then on, they called her Mona Lisa. Rutledge gently examined the alien while Leonoff filmed and took photographs. Finally, Leona Snyder was back in range. She radioed down, but this time on a private channel.
Snyder to Rover? Will? You okay?
We're okay, Leona. We found something unexpected in the Apollo 19 LEM. No crew, but,
We know. Houston is back online. We can see everything.
You want to patch me through?
Not yet. Will?
What is it?
Ground control knows.
They know? They know what?
About what you found in Apollo 19's LEM. They already know.
How is that possible?
Will, they know.
But we also found a bloody glove, and I'm pretty sure it belongs to Jim Reynolds. We need to go...
Will, they know about that too. They know all of it.
I don't understand how they would get...
Will, Control wants you to bring the alien woman back to your module.
What? Why?
They,
Leona? What? What is it?
They want us to bring her home.
The Apollo 20 urban legend has become one of my favorites. And the more I learn about it, the more I like it. When YouTube user retired AFB, aka Commander William Rutledge, posted his Apollo 20 videos, the internet exploded. The videos look so good. But is it real?
Absolutely.
No.
Damn it.
There are a few articles out there that debunk the videos practically frame by frame, but there's no reason to go through the trouble. Someone openly admitted to creating them. The videos were created by French artist Thierry Speth as part of a science fiction film project he was working on. He used a combination of practical effects and 3D to create the videos. The 2 videos that got the most attention were the ones of the control panel and of the alien woman, because they look really good. But he has a lot of other videos connected to this project, and they don't look as amazing. Now, even though Speth freely admitted to creating the legend, somehow it took 9 years for anyone to bother talking to him about it. Credit goes to Chad Baxter for finally interviewing Speth in 2016, and I'll link to that interview below. The story you heard today is basically a mashup of a few versions of the Apollo 20 urban legend floating around the internet, mixed in with the novel Speth wrote that tells the entire story. I'll link to Speth's novel below, but Before you spend money on it, be warned. Despite writing the book in English, Speth doesn't speak it very well. So as far as stories go, it's clunky. But still, it's entertaining. In Speth's version of the story, the alien woman wakes up during the procedure and knocks Rutledge unconscious. And those golden tears they collected?
The yellow goo?
Yeah. In the story, it has medicinal properties. Leonov has cancer with only a few months to live. He drinks the goo and it cures him. By the way, Alexei Leonov is one of the most famous cosmonauts in history, so Speth changed his name in the novel. Also, Rutledge and Snyder, they end up having an affair in space. Then they get married and they also drink the yellow goo, which makes them age more slowly.
Yeah, but what about the bloody glove?
Right. Remember the plants inside the ship?
Yeah?
Well, they ate the Apollo 19 crew. The glove was all that was left.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that novel. As I said, it's clunky. Despite Speth admitting to creating this, you'll find interviews with the quote-unquote real William Rutledge, and those interviews have expanded the lore.
But you know I don't trust the French. How do we know he isn't just taking credit?
Well, a lot of people thought that, and that's why it's so weird that nobody bothered to talk to him. But about halfway through the interview with Chad Baxter, Speth holds up a mask of the alien woman.
And it's the same alien for sure?
100%. Go back and freeze frame. It's absolutely the same alien. If you want to see exactly how Speth made the video look so good, I'll link to an article called Apollo 20 Deconstructed. So how is a story like this believed by so many people for so many years? I think the answer is easy. It's the American government's fault.
No, it's always the government's fault.
You don't even know what I'm going to say.
It doesn't matter. It's still the government's fault.
There really were 3 more Apollo missions planned, and they really were canceled due to lack of funding and lack of public interest. That is one of the biggest tragedies in human history. Apollo 17 was extremely successful. Space exploration should have been a top priority for the United States and the Soviet Union. Instead, they made their top priority war in Vietnam. In today's money, that war would cost $1 trillion. In 2022, NASA's budget was $22 billion. That's a budget reduction of 90% since the 1970s. Yet the United States Department of Defense budget was $722 billion.
Not including black budget.
Right, so let's call it $1 trillion. That's really why the Apollo program ended. America beat Russia to the moon. That was the mission. Not exploration, not research, not science, not the betterment of all mankind. It was petty competition. That's why I'm rooting for the Chinese to keep launching missions to the moon. I hope they find more helium-3 and other valuable resources, because that's the only way my country gets back to focusing on space. If you can't count on American ingenuity, at least you can count on good old American greed. And the United States better not wait too long, because if China has only a fraction of the success of the Apollo program, it won't be long before we're all speaking Mandarin. Yeah, so that one is debunked, but I still think the moon is weird. Okay, what's next? Episode 126, The Soul Recycler. Okay, this one is the theory that the moon was built by the Anunnaki and is now used as a base for reptilian humanoids to use human soul energy for food.
Oh, lizard people love eating human. When lizard people say they're going out for Chinese, they mean that literally.
Okay, that's enough.
It's a cookbook. It's a cookbook. Twilight Zone?
I know it's the Twilight Zone. Okay, this next episode has a bit of a twist. And if it's the first time you're watching it, I don't want to spoil it. But this one is a little unsettling. Your world is an illusion. Your choices are irrelevant. Your friends, your family, and everyone around you are just manifestations of your mind. You're a trapped animal in a cage, a virtual reality created more than 250,000 years ago for a single purpose: to use you as food. Your emotions are food for those who created the cage. Feelings of happiness and joy are digestible, but those emotions are nowhere near as nourishing as sadness, malice, and especially anger. Pain on a small scale is good, but pain due to war, famine, and pandemics? Well, that's even better. You're born, you grow, and you spend the first third of your life learning how to live in a society that barely knows you exist. Maybe get married, have kids, maybe even grandkids. Then you die, and the pain ends. But death is just the beginning, because now you get to do it all over again. The oldest recorded history comes from ancient Sumerian texts, and that's where we're first introduced to the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are believed to be 7 deities, also referred to as the 7 gods who decree. Their purpose was to determine the fate of mankind, and their stories mirror some that we find in Greek mythology. And like the Greek gods, the Anunnaki dwell in the heavens, but also interact with people and influence events here on Earth. Gods from polytheistic religions like the Anunnaki, the Greek gods, and the Roman gods served many purposes. They were used to explain natural phenomena like Zeus creating thunderstorms. Thor also served this role in Norse mythology. The gods provided comfort about the uncertainties of life and questions about mortality, the afterlife, and human suffering. Gods and their myths established social norms and values. Myths often included lessons about the virtues of honesty, courage, and wisdom, or the danger of hubris and deceit. Worshipping gods who represent these qualities creates a framework for social and moral order. Gods are part of the creation myth of many cultures, used to explain the origin of mankind. This was also true for the ancient Sumerians. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, written thousands of years ago, the Anunnaki are directly involved in the creation of humans. However, the stories about the Anunnaki might not be myths. The stories might be history. Zecharia Sitchin, in his book The 12th Planet, claims the Anunnaki are actually aliens who visited Earth thousands of years ago from their home planet Nibiru. When they arrived, the deity called Enki added alien DNA to ancient man, and the result was us. The intention was to create a slave species to mine gold for the Anunnaki. The gold was refined and used in terraforming their home planet, which was suffering from a poisoned atmosphere. Now, this may sound like a far-fetched story to some,
Well, not to me.
but this creation story shows up in other cultures as well. There's an ancient Zulu legend about 2 brothers named Wawani and Mpanku, who were from an alien race with scaly skin. Thousands of years ago, the brothers stole an egg from a fire dragon, emptied out the yolk until it was hollow, and then rolled it across the sky to Earth. That egg was the moon. Many ancient texts describe a time when the moon didn't exist, or at least it didn't exist here. Aristotle wrote about the Pelasgians, who lived in ancient Greece since the oldest days, at a time before the moon. Apollonius of Rhodes also talks about a time when the moon wasn't yet in the sky.
In ages past, before the silver orb adorned night's somber shroud, Gaia stood alone. The tides lay still, untouched by Lunar's grasp, and darkness reigned where moonlight never cast its tranquil spell. Oh, how the gods conspired to shape that radiant disk.
Greek historian Plutarch wrote about the Arcadians. They were a very ancient people who lived in Greece. Plutarch described them as a pre-lunar people. Roman poet Ovid also wrote about the Arcadians.
In Arcadia's lush fields, where Pan's flute sang, a truth lies hidden, nearly forgot by man. The Arcadians are said to have possessed their land before the birth of Zeus, and the folk is older than the moon.
Evidence of a sky with no moon has also been found on the other side of the world. In the ancient site of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, there are symbols that depict the moon coming into orbit, and this happened at a specific moment in time thousands of years ago, long before recorded history. According to the Zulu and other ancient cultures, the moon didn't form. The moon was built, and not built here. The Zulus say that the moon was built in another part of the galaxy by the alien race that Wawani and Mpanku came from. They built the moon as a monitoring station to keep an eye on us, the human race. But what kind of aliens are depicted in these old legends? They're not the small gray aliens. The aliens that built the moon are reptilian.
Lizard people?
Yep, lizard people.
Lizard.
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 Better. Let's go!
David Icke has written over 20 books about various conspiracy theories. He's covered everything from the Illuminati to UFOs to the multiverse.
He's my hero.
But he's probably best known for his theory about a humanoid reptilian race.
Well, it's not a theory if it's true.
Do you mind?
Sorry. Lizard people get me really excited.
Oh, I know.
Did you know you can buy a lizard people coffee mug from an iFile store?
No merch plugs, please. Ike claims that humans share the Earth with a race of shape-shifting reptilian humanoids called the Archons. Wamani and Mpanku, the brothers from the Zulu legend who brought the moon to Earth, were Archons. The Sumerians called these Archon brothers Enki and Enlil, who are also rulers of the Anunnaki. This race of reptilians primarily lives underground, but a few of them live among us as well. The surface-dwelling beings are here to make sure humanity stays compliant with and unaware of their plan. They're involved in the highest levels of government, business, and technology. They're monarchs, politicians, and bankers. They own and operate major media companies.
Mark, are the allegations true that you're secretly a lizard? I'm gonna have to go with no on that. I am not a lizard.
They influence every aspect of human life. They are the Illuminati. When we describe the reptilians as shapeshifters, you might think of a creature that physically changes its shape, like Odo from Star Trek, Mystique from Marvel Comics, or Tonks from Harry Potter. Reptilians don't do this. They actually always look like themselves. What they do is manipulate the human brain to perceive them differently. The source of the reptilians' power is their ability to alter our perception of reality. And they don't do this with telepathy, they do this with technology. According to David Icke, the moon is not only a spacecraft, but also a holographic projection device. The broadcasts from the moon warp our reality, or at least our perception of reality. There's what's known as a frequency embargo around the Earth.
Wait. Who enforces this embargo?
Well, there's a bunch of alien races who are part of a galactic federation, and they keep an eye on the reptilians, but it's a whole thing.
Go on, I got time.
No, it needs its own video.
She got me all excited. This is a bunch of bullshit.
There is much more to reality than we can perceive with our senses, and the human brain is quite capable of experiencing the true universe. In fact, it was specifically designed to do so. But the frequencies that would allow us to see the real world are being blocked. Instead, we're locked into this simple three-dimensional existence, but there is much more being withheld from us. If you believe in simulation theory, then these beings are the creators of the simulation. If you're religious, then these beings are demons or jinn. Either way, they're not our friends. But why? Why would an advanced race want to keep humans oblivious to the real world? Well, when humans were first created, the alien creators learned something. All other animals on Earth are driven by instinct. The instinct to eat, to survive, to reproduce, and that's about it. But when the first humans were given sentience, a byproduct of that sentience was emotion. Sure, humans are still driven by instinct. We're driven to survive and reproduce like every other animal.
Ugh, and I got the guppy support payments to prove it. Oof,
But because humans are now aware of themselves and their existence, they experience the world differently. They experience fear of the future. Humans experience the pleasure of nostalgia for the past. No other animal has this gift, or this curse. Animals kill for survival, but humans kill out of hate. Our alien creators learned that our emotions carry energy, and the creators learned that this energy can be consumed for nourishment. Unfortunately for us, negative emotions are the most nourishing of all. Some have described the alien desire for negative human emotion as a drug addiction. Now, if humans were able to see and understand our true reality, we'd know that our energy, or soul, or spirit, or whatever you want to call it, can move to a higher plane of existence after we die. But instead, the alien creators, addicted to our emotions, keep us here. We're born, we live to feed the creators, then we die. Then we come back and do it all over again. It's forced reincarnation. This process is handled by a piece of equipment that's been called a soul recycler, or a soul cube, which is a large box-shaped device that's installed on the moon. The cube watches us and then transmits our energy back to Earth after we die, over and over again, and has been doing so for thousands of years. Now, I know the theory sounds like science fiction, but many skeptics were turned into believers on December 6, 2021. That's when, completely by accident, a lunar probe took a picture of the Soul Cube.
It's my conclusion over many years that reincarnation is a trap. It's not that it doesn't exist, although I don't think it's quite the same as it's explained. It's a bit more subtle, maybe, but I do think it's a trap.
The recycling of souls, reincarnation, is the machinery of this universe.
John Lear, son of Learjet inventor Bill Lear, flew his first flight at age 14. He became a stunt pilot, a contract pilot for the CIA, and set multiple aviation records. But John Lear's most known for his theories about the alien presence on Earth. He's also exposed a lot of information about the cube-shaped soul catcher on the moon.
The soul catcher is I think is the 6 mile high tower in the middle of Sinus Medai, right in the middle of the center of the moon as you look at the moon. And the famous photo that Richard found, Lunar Orbiter 384M, shows that huge tower, and he also has 2 other photographs that show that tower. I think that tower is what I call the soul catcher. When you die, your soul goes to the soul catcher.
But the moon isn't the only place these soul catchers exist.
There are several soul transmission stations, both on Earth and on the moon, and depending on where you're going in your next lifetime is which transmission station takes over.
When you couple John Lear's belief in the soul catcher with David Icke's theory that we're stuck in an endless loop of reincarnation, an unsettling reality emerges that our only purpose is to serve as food for our alien jailers. And what's even more upsetting is that negative emotions are really what they crave. Supporters of the reptilian humanoid theory say that when there's a global event that affects millions of people, like a war or major conflict, it's our jailers at work.
It might explain why Cro-Magnon Homo sapiens sapien is so violent. Why are we always in states of war? Why are we competing and always challenged by murder and violence?
I really don't like the idea that we're not in control of our lives. And I really hate the idea that we're not in control of our death. So my mind just rejects the idea altogether. But then I found this.
What the is that?
That is the Soul Cube on the moon.
Leaping lizards! See what I did there?
This photo was taken December 6, 2021 by the Chinese-made lunar rover Yutu-2 while exploring the far side of the moon. A cube-shaped object is clearly seen 80 meters from the Von Karman crater. And for some reason, the China National Space Administration labeled this object Mystery Hut. And this only lends credence to the idea that the moon is a sort of observatory with a soul-harvesting machine. There's even more evidence that Earth is actually what some call a prison planet. In his book, Humans Are Not From Earth, Dr. Ellis Silver contends that humans are actually from another planet. They were brought here thousands of years ago and mated with Neanderthals. The hybrid species is us.
My thesis proposes that mankind did not evolve from native Earth organisms, but evolved elsewhere and was transported to Earth between 60,000 and 200,000 years ago. Mankind is supposedly the most highly developed species on the planet, yet is surprisingly unsuited and ill-equipped for Earth's environment.
The idea that extraterrestrials played a role in human history is also known as intervention theory. Dr. Silver argues that if humans actually evolved on Earth, we'd be much more comfortable with the environment. For example, humans are really the only animals that are susceptible to sunburn. Fish, reptiles, birds all have natural ultraviolet protection in their scales and feathers. Whales and dolphins have special skin cells that repair DNA damaged by UV radiation. Any mammal with fur is protected from ultraviolet rays, including apes. If we evolved from apes, why did we lose our hair? Evolution is supposed to make us stronger, not weaker.
Not true for your Uncle Vito.
That's true. He's pretty hairy.
Pretty hairy? Ugh, I bet that guy can open a banana with his feet.
Dr. Silver points out that human babies are basically helpless at birth. They require constant attention for years or they'll die. Yes, some species of animals require parental care for a time after birth, but there are plenty of species that require none. Insects, fish, and most reptiles are born completely self-sufficient. Some land mammals are born standing up. Some birds are born with their eyes open and able to find food on their own. No other animal on the planet is as helpless as we are at birth. Silver claims the reason so many people have bad backs is that we evolved on a planet with less gravity. That's why as we age, our knees and hips give out. We're not designed to be so heavy. We're also prone to chronic illness more than other mammals. So why were we brought here in the first place? Well, Silver has a few ideas. One is that humans were brought to Earth as a natural predator to wipe out other species. Now, if that's true, it worked. At one time, there were several different hominid species living on Earth at the same time. As recently as just 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and at least one other species coexisted with each other for several 100,000 years. Then modern man arrived, and suddenly all other species were gone. But Dr. Silver has another theory that tracks with a lot of what we've discussed today, that humans were removed from our natural environment because we were violent, we were destructive, and we overconsumed natural resources.
Well, that hasn't changed.
The theory said that the aliens erased our memories so we'd have no recollection of the civilizations and technologies we left behind. Then they dropped us off on Earth and left us to our own devices. They watched us for a while to see how we developed, and eventually they left. All the UFO activity we're seeing now could be our creators coming to check on their creation. Maybe they're checking to see if we've evolved past our violent tendencies. Maybe we're finally ready to be released from our prison and reintegrate into galactic society. If that's really why they're here, then unfortunately for us, our parole, it's going to be denied. The existence of the human soul has been pondered, well, forever. Greek philosophers like Plato and Socrates proposed an immortal soul that lives on after the body's death. Many religions say the soul originates from God and exists eternally. But does scientific evidence support the existence of a soul that can be quantified? In the early 20th century, physician Duncan McDougall tried to determine if the soul had measurable mass. He thought that if a soul existed, it would have weight. So upon death, the soul would escape and the weight loss could be detected. McDougall had 6 dying patients placed on sensitive scales, finding that they lost an average of 21 grams at the moment of death. He concluded this represented the soul's mass. But this small sample size and errors in methodology cast doubt on the experiment. Modern neuroscience says our consciousness and sense of self exist in our physical brain, not a separate soul. Brain imaging shows that our personality, our memories, and capabilities are tied to physical patterns and activity within our neurons. Damage to certain areas of the brain through injury or disease can impact sensory perception, mobility, emotions, and even one's identity. However, there is an argument that, sure, the brain is responsible for cognition and awareness, but a soul could simply be energy that creates our consciousness. And if so, that consciousness could continue after death. According to new theories using quantum physics, the soul may exist in another dimension beyond our normal space-time. Some tie this to quantum non-locality and entanglement. This is where information is passed between particles not just faster than the speed of light, but instantly, no matter how far apart they are. This theory says the soul interacts with the human body through quantum states, exchanging information instantly across any distance. Studies of near-death experiences provide intriguing reports of the soul leaving the body and passing through a tunnel and encountering angelic beings or dead relatives. Yet neuroscience says many elements of NDEs are generated by physical brain activity under stress. Out-of-body and near-death episodes have been induced in controlled settings by stimulating specific parts of the brain. Conclusive scientific evidence of the human soul has yet to be discovered. But maybe the soul isn't meant to be detected with a scale or a microscope or a computer. And just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. Religions around the world say the soul is eternal. In Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the soul originates from God and can achieve eternal life through faith and virtuous living. Hinduism and Sikhism believe the soul is immortal and reincarnated based on karma. Buddhism is a little different, though. The Wheel of Life provides a symbolic map of samsara in Buddhism. Buddhists must attain enlightenment before moving beyond this cycle, and that can take many, many tries. And that's starting to sound a lot like the Soul Recycler. And here's something interesting. In the image of the Wheel of Life, which is found on the walls of monasteries and schools all over the world, Buddha's pointing at the moon. The moon is the most familiar object in the night sky. It's inspired stories and myths and even religions. The moon has fueled scientific intrigue throughout human history. But here's the thing. The moon is weird. By all accounts, it shouldn't even be there. The moon's orbit is extremely close to the Earth. In fact, it's the largest moon in relation to its host planet in our entire solar system, or any solar system. We've never found anything like this in the galaxy. And this proximity has made total solar eclipses possible. This is because of the precise diameters and distances between the sun, moon, and Earth. This is an unbelievable coincidence. Some might say, impossible.
There is no astronomical reason why the moon and the sun should fit so well. It is the sheerest of coincidences, and only the Earth among all the planets is blessed in this fashion.
It's not only too close, it's too big.
That's what she said. What?
Using other planets as a reference, the size of the moon should be about 40 miles in diameter. That's it. It's over 2,000 miles wide. This is also not seen anywhere else. The closest comparison is Pluto and its moon Charon, which is about 2/3 the size of Pluto. But this probably doesn't count because Pluto and Charon are a double dwarf planet.
That's what she said. What?
The Earth and Moon are also really a double planet. But there's something else strange about that. The barycenter, or center of gravity between the Earth and Moon, is inside the Earth. That means there should be a wobble in the Moon's orbit. The Moon does wobble a little bit, but its orbit is one of the most perfectly circular that's ever been seen. The Moon is also precisely locked in orbit so the same side always faces Earth. This is also highly unusual among moons and planets. Some scientists argue that the Moon doesn't wobble because it's not very dense. But that's also a problem. If the Moon and Earth were formed at the same time, which is the leading theory, then why is the Earth so much more dense?
Because the moon is hollow.
Right.
The lunar orbiter experiments vastly improved our knowledge of the moon's gravitational field, indicating the frightening possibility that the moon might be hollow.
In November 1969, Apollo 12 launched as NASA's second manned mission to the moon. One of the key objectives was investigating the moon's interior. Apollo 12 astronauts placed seismometers on the lunar surface, similar to those used to detect earthquakes on Earth. The astronauts then intentionally crashed their ascent stage module into the moon to gather seismic data. Now, instead of typical seismic patterns, the data showed the moon vibrating for over an hour. The moon was famously described as ringing like a bell. The phenomenon led some to speculate that the moon might be hollow or contain significant hollow spaces. This theory is supported by the still classified Apollo 17 project called Chapel Bell. And this sounds like an experiment that has something to do with sound, but all these years later, it's still classified. Why? In 1970, two Soviet scientists proposed that not only is the moon hollow, the moon is an artificial spacecraft brought to Earth a long time ago. This spaceship moon theory explains many of the anomalies, like the low density, the sound reverberation, and why the moon is even here at all. Spaceship Moon also explains the strange crater issue.
Crater issue?
Oh yeah, moon craters are very odd. When an asteroid impacts a moon or planet, it leaves a crater. The bigger the asteroid, the deeper the crater, right?
Yeah, I feel you.
Well, on the moon, no matter how big the object that impacts it, craters don't penetrate deeper than a couple of miles. Now, this could be explained by a rigid, impenetrable outer shell encasing the moon.
Spaceship Moon!
Mm-hmm.
If the astronomical data is reduced, it is found that the data require that the interior of the moon is less dense than the outer parts. Indeed, it would seem that the moon is more like a hollow than a homogeneous sphere.
Data also indicates the moon's core is less dense than the outer layers, the complete opposite of, well, every other celestial object ever discovered. This could be evidence that the moon has vast hollow inner cavities. Also, the soil and moon dust on the surface are actually older than the rock and soil within the moon. That only makes sense if the interior moon was mined, hollowed out, and then the material brought to the surface. Now, there are scientific explanations for all of this, but to be honest, they fall short.
Looking at all the anomalies and unanswered questions about the moon, the best explanation for the moon is an observational error. It doesn't exist.
It's easier to explain the non-existence of the moon than its existence.
we cannot help but come to the conclusion that the moon, by rights, ought not to be there. The fact that it is one of those strokes of luck almost too good to accept.
The moon is weird. It shouldn't be there, and it might be hollow. But is it a transmission device that affects our behavior? Well, there's more crime during a full moon. There are more car accidents. Sensitivity to pain is higher during a full moon. A full moon disrupts our sleep. Some people are prone to erratic behavior during a full moon. This is called the werewolf effect. This is also where the word lunatic comes from. Talk to a cop or a nurse. They'll tell you that they can tell when it's getting close to a full moon. Again, science tries to explain this erratic behavior. Like there's more crime during a full moon because it's easier to see.
No, it's also easier to get caught.
Right, the science is thin. And notice that all these changes in behavior during a full moon are negative. More crime, more pain, more car crashes. If there are aliens feeding off our negative emotions and they use the moon to do it, well, suddenly everything makes sense. But there is good news. You can fight back. Reptilian humanoid aliens using technology to alter our reality in order to create negative emotions? Our souls being used for food, then recycled over and over again on the moon? This story is a lot. And how much of it is true? Well, a lot of it depends on your perspective and what you choose to believe. But let's take it one piece at a time. The Anunnaki are documented in Sumerian texts, but there's plenty of documentation of Zeus and Apollo and Athena and the rest of the Greek gods. Same with Roman gods, Norse gods, all gods really. But are any of those gods real? Well, you decide. But Zecharia Sitchin's interpretations of Sumerian texts have been largely discredited and disregarded. He's been criticized for inaccurate translations of the Sumerian tablets. Skeptics say he manipulated the translations in order to support his theory.
Yeah, but his story is true.
Maybe. But the story about gods coming from the sky, creating man or helping man, that story is almost universal. The Anunnaki are also connected to the Great Flood, which is a story found in every culture on Earth. Supporters of the Anunnaki theory claim that human genetics have traces of alien DNA. The truth is, human DNA is pretty boring. Our DNA is close to everything on Earth. Chimps share almost 99% of their DNA with humans. Dogs and cows share around 80%. Birds and humans share 65% of their DNA. Humans even share over 50% of their DNA with bananas.
You're related to a banana?
Yep.
Maybe that's why you got a peel.
Dr. Ellis Silver's theory that humans didn't originate on Earth is really interesting. He lays out a lot of scientific evidence to support this theory. But even he admits the theory has some holes, and he's released updates to try and fill in some of these holes. Still, mainstream science rejects the idea that humans originated on a different planet. But there is a wrinkle. In 2020, researchers discovered that about 50,000 years ago, ancient humans procreated with a species that scientists didn't know existed. They call this ghost DNA, and the timing lines up perfectly with Dr. Silver's theory. His book is amazing, and I'd love to do a full episode on how humans might have been transported here. So if you'd like to see that, let me know. That will be a wild ride. Now, let's talk lizard people.
Lizard.
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 Better.
The most well-known proponent of the reptilian conspiracy is David Icke.
My hero.
David Icke is well-read, well-spoken, and highly entertaining. His theories are extremely creative. But like most conspiracy theories, you can't prove or disprove him.
Yaha!
But remember, in 1991, he claimed to be the son of God and the world was going to end, and he made this claim on television while wearing a turquoise tracksuit.
Good to see you. You do claim to be the son of God.
Oh, come on, heroes wear tracksuits.
The lizard people story seems to have started in 1934 with an LA Times article. A mining engineer claimed to have found tunnels underneath Los Angeles. A Hopi Indian told him the legend of the lizard people, who are an advanced race that escaped through the tunnels 5,000 years ago.
Well, that's why so many movie stars are shape-shifting lizard people. Easy commute.
Maybe, but there are no tunnels and there is no Hopi legend of the lizard people, so I don't believe that one. And honestly, when I started this topic, I didn't believe any of it. Well, except for the moon stuff. The moon is weird. But while researching, I found myself bouncing between feelings of depression and fear and anxiety and especially anger. The message boards, blogs, comment sections I came across are filled with people expressing outrage. They're furious that they have us all trapped in this never-ending loop of misery, that we're made to endure this torturous, unfair life time and time again. We're not given a choice to come back or not. Our only purpose is to be food for our prison guards. But if they truly believe that an advanced race is feeding off our negative emotions, well, they're giving our jailers exactly what they want. There were so many comments that were blame-seeking. I saw a lot of people with a self-centered victim mentality. It was frustrating to read, but I understand it. Life is hard. Life is unpredictable. And life is painful. When things in life go wrong, it's easy to shift responsibility to a theoretical they instead of looking in the mirror. David Icke, John Lear, and others who promote the reptilian conspiracy say that we don't have to exist in an endless cycle of pain and reincarnation. Negative emotions fuel the cycle. Positive emotions can break it. So you have a choice. You can choose to be the change. Choose kindness over anger. Choose acceptance over judgment. And choose gratitude over the endless desire for more. Choose joy over sadness and mercy over revenge. Just choose love over hate. Now, I know it's not easy. I really do. But your life really can be whatever you want it to be. The choice is yours.
3+1,5+00.
Now, I'm not religious, but this episode makes me hope there's a heaven.
Heaven? That's just a marketing campaign.
Heaven is a marketing campaign.
The lizard people invented the concept of heaven to trick us into giving up our souls. They're a bunch of scaly schemers.
Well, next up
Yeah,
is...
see? A fake moon arising. I know lizard people live inside. If we don't hold them back, we'll be a lizard people snack. There's a fake moon in the sky.
Next up is the story of Ingo Swann. He was a psychic who worked for the CIA under Project Stargate, and he had a lot of success remote viewing places all over the world. But he also remote viewed the moon, and what he found up there was terrifying. When Ingo Swann released his book titled Penetration in 1998, he claimed to be a psychic who was employed by the CIA to remote view the dark side of the moon, specifically to look for alien presence. It sounded like science fiction, but in 2006, when the CIA started releasing documents on the Stargate project, Swann's participation in the program was confirmed. When Swann was asked about the existence of extraterrestrials, he said not only were they already here, but they are building something on the far side of the moon. And, according to Swann, these aliens aren't friendly. Let's find out why. When Ingo Swann was a child, his family noticed he had psychic potential. When he got older, he wanted to explore this talent, so he began volunteering for experiments in ESP. At first, researchers tested Swann to see if he could influence plants with mental activity, or alter the temperature of an environment using his mind. And Swann was successful enough that more and more scientists became interested in him. But it was a few years later where Ingo Swann would find his specialty. In the early 1970s, Swann was part of a study for the American Society of Psychical Research, and this study involved Swann sitting in a chair and attempting to project his consciousness into sealed boxes, which contained symbols that Swann would try to read. During one experiment, he was asked to see what he saw inside of a box, and Swann said he saw nothing, just darkness. The researcher was disappointed and said, "Oh, that's too bad, let's try something else." Swann said, "No, I see darkness because the light bulb inside the box is burnt out." The researcher was puzzled. He walked over to the box, opened it, and sure enough, the light was out, and a star was born. Ingo Swann's success in these early experiments got the attention of the Stanford Research Institute. You might remember the SRI from our Project Stargate video, which I'll link below. SRI had been remote viewing places around the world for years, but once they found Ingo Swann, who was extremely successful at this, they wondered if he could remote view other places in the solar system. There was an experiment in 1973 where Ingo Swann was asked to project his consciousness to the planet Jupiter. At first, Swann rejected the idea, Ingo Swann never wanted to remote view anything that couldn't be confirmed. There are plenty of frauds who claim to have psychic abilities, and Swann valued his reputation. He didn't see any value in going to Jupiter if his observations couldn't be confirmed. But the researchers at SRI told Swann Jupiter was chosen because NASA had probes on the way there right now. So Swann agreed, and he made a lot of observations about Jupiter that the Pioneer probes soon confirmed. He saw a hydrogen mantle, rotating storms like cyclones. He mentioned high infrared readings, the colors of the clouds, and ice crystals in the atmosphere.
The probes confirmed all of this?
They did. Skeptics will say all these observations could be deduced, like, of course, Jupiter has violent storms, we can see them. Same with the color of clouds, infrared, and atmospheric ice crystals. Even if we can't see this stuff, we can deduce that they're there. But Swann saw something else, something new. He said he saw a ring around Jupiter, just like Saturn's ring. But Jupiter's ring, according to Swann, was much smaller than Saturn's and closer to the planet. He said it was made up of dust and tiny asteroids. This was not something we could see from Earth, or even assume was there.
Did the probes see the ring?
The Pioneer probes in 1973 and 1974 did not see a faint ring around Jupiter.
Oh.
But when Voyager 1 passed by Jupiter in 1979...
Tell me there was a ring.
There was a ring.
Yahtzee!
I am not this body in terms of consciousness, and consciousness can go places where the body cannot.
Ingo Swann was so accurate as a remote viewer that people began to take notice, specifically the United States government.
Of course.
In March 1975, Ingo Swann received a call at 3 a.m. He was told to go to Washington and visit the Museum of Natural History. There he should stand near the elephant in the central rotunda at noon. So he does. Right on schedule, a military-looking man approaches him and hands him a card. It reads, "Do not speak or ask questions. This is for our safety as well as yours. Please follow me." He's led to a car and seated next to another military-looking man, and in his book he calls these guys the twins. And twin number 2 hands him another card. It reads, "Please do not speak. We need to search you for listening devices." They do, and he's handed one final card. "We would like your help on a project suited to your talent. Are you comfortable in a helicopter?" Well, Swann takes a long moment, finally nods. The twins take the cards from Ingo Swann's hand, then a bag is placed over his head, and the car speeds away. Though Ingo Swann couldn't see, he felt that he was driven around in circles. Eventually, he's led from the car where he hears a helicopter spinning up. His face still shrouded, he's buckled in and flown to a location in or near Washington, D.C. When the helicopter lands, Swann is led to a quiet building and then into an elevator. The doors open and the bag is finally removed. Swann blinks his eyes, adjusting to the light. Then a kindly-looking man introduces himself as Mr. Axelrod. Ingo Swann is obviously nervous. And Mr. Axelrod sees this, he smiles, tells him not to worry, that he's in no danger, and offers him a cigar. Swann gladly takes one. It's his brand. The men go to an office, sit and enjoy a cigar where Mr. Axelrod makes a proposal. Axelrod says he represents a group who would like Swann to participate in a remote viewing project. For his effort, he would be paid $1,000 a day in cash, which in today's money is over $6,000 a day.
Inflation, huh?
Yep.
Are we going to talk about the Federal Reserve and what a scam it is?
Not in this video.
Audit the Fed!
Okay, settle down. So, Ingo Swann really needs the money, but to get it, there are a few catches. First, he can't reveal any of this to anyone, and can't speak of it for at least 10 years. The other catch is for the next few days, Swann isn't to leave the facility. He'll be provided with a comfortable room, TV, a gym, swimming pool, and anything he needs, but if he takes the job, he stays on site under constant surveillance. Now, Ingo Swann is quiet for a while. As crazy as the past few years have been, he's never been through anything like this. Mysterious calls in the middle of the night, clandestine meetings, subterranean facilities, and now a kind but strange man offers him a lot of cash for an unknown mission. Axelrod sees Swann processing all of this and finally asks if he agrees to the terms. Swann nods that he does. Axelrod puts out his cigar, shakes Swann's hand and says, "Good, get some rest. Tomorrow, we begin."
And it has very distinct features of a satellite dish. It's got the dish itself, the crater shape. It's got a long spike that appears to come out of the middle. All sorts of stuff that looks exactly like a satellite dish on Earth looks.
The next morning, Axelrod tells Ingo Swann that he'll be remote viewing the moon. And Swann is confused by this, but Axelrod reminds him,
No questions.
Right. And Swann is given a list of coordinates and goes through them one by one. Some locations, he doesn't see anything, but others he was able to view large cliffs, see craters, dunes of white powder, all the things you'd expect to see on the moon. Finally, Swann comes across something interesting and confusing. He describes seeing tracks on the surface, tracks that seem to have been made by tractors or some kind of machinery. He sees patterns that look like they were made by wind, even though the moon has no atmosphere.
Supposedly.
Swann gets the sense that there is atmosphere there. Then Swann moves into a crater which is filled with a green haze. Something is generating light, and Swann notes that the light is diffused. And diffused light isn't possible on the moon. You need an atmosphere to scatter the light, so if it's not the atmosphere, what is it? He moves closer to the light. Swann sees something that looks like an airfield. He describes large structures like hangars, roads, towers, and machinery. Across craters and chasms, there are bridges, evidence of a lot of activity, industrial activity. Cut into the rocks are perfectly round holes, like they were dug with large earth-moving equipment. He moves to a different location and sees some structures emitting light of all different colors. Swann goes in for a closer look. The domes have windows, and even though the area was dark, he could see a fine mist inside the structures and that same eerie green glow. Swann moves closer. He goes right up to the windows. Inside, he describes humanoid figures that look almost like us. He describes this as an area of high activity. Whoever or whatever these beings are, they're very busy, and Swann continues to observe, describing everything he sees. Suddenly, 2 of the beings, then 3, then a dozen, then more, they just stop. They turn to the window where Swann has projected himself. This makes Swann very nervous. He says, "They see me." Then calmly but urgently, Axelrod says, come back now." Swann says, "They're pointing at me." Axelrod tells Swann firmly, "Please come back quickly away from that place." Swann wills his consciousness back and slowly opens his eyes. Finally, he turns to Axelrod and says, "You already know they're psychic, don't you?" Axelrod takes a deep breath and says, "The experiment is over. It's time for you to go home."
Neil and Buzz were on the lunar surface. Neil switched to the medical channel and spoke directly with the chief medical officer, saying, "They're here, they're parked on the side of the crater, they're watching us."
Though Ingo Swann's moon experiment was over, Mr. Axelrod and the secret organization wasn't quite finished with him. About 6 months after leaving Washington, D.C., Swann was in a supermarket. While doing some grocery shopping, he spotted a stunning woman. He describes her as one of the most beautiful women he'd ever seen.
What was she wearing?
Don't be creepy.
Hello, I'm asking for science.
Well, Swann says she was barely wearing anything at all. Short shorts, bikini top, and the tallest high heels he'd ever seen.
Heels tall, bikini small. She said she liked the ocean.
Excuse me?
LL Cool J, I'm going back to Cali.
I don't think so.
Nice.
Anyway, Swann was obviously very taken with this woman because the chapter in his book, It's Barely Safe for Work. He says when he saw her, he felt a wave of electricity going through him and felt tingling all over his body. Suddenly, he felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, and in that moment, he had the distinct feeling that she was an extraterrestrial. Now, Swann was very aware of how ridiculous this sounded, and he was about to chalk it up to him simply being smitten at the sight of her. But then he turned around and saw the twins from the moon experiment. So he panics and runs out of the store. But later that evening, he receives a phone call, and he's told to fly to New York immediately and be in Grand Central Station the next morning and wait for contact. Of course, he goes. When he gets to Grand Central, he sees one of the twins standing near a payphone. He gestures at Swann to come over. The phone rings. It's Mr. Axelrod. Axelrod asks all kinds of questions about his interaction with the woman, and Swann relays the story. At first, Axelrod is suspicious. He demands to know if he knows her, if she saw him, if she might be following him. Now, Swann doesn't understand any of this, and he starts to become frightened and tells Axelrod he's never seen her before and has never had any contact with her. Now, finally, Axelrod tells Swann, just stay away from her. Swann asks who she is. Axelrod says, all you need to know is that she's very dangerous. Swann says he understands, and they chat for a while, and Axelrod asks him how his remote viewing success rate is doing. Swan says he's almost 65% accurate, but not quite there. So Axelrod says, when you get to 65%, write the number 65 on a note on your desk and leave it there. Tell no one, we'll be in touch. And just like that, Axelrod hangs up. And Ingo Swann doesn't hear from Axelrod for a year, but he finally gets his remote viewing success rate to 65%. And just as he was instructed, he writes the number on a slip of paper and places it on his desk and goes home for the night. Now, even though his office is locked and nobody knows the code, when he gets in the following morning, the note is gone. And on his desk is what looks like a light dusting of powder. And in the powder, someone scribbled 2 words: expect contact. A few days after Ingo Swann was told to expect contact, he was heading to the university cafeteria when Mr. Axelrod appeared. Axelrod walked right up to Ingo Swann, shook his hand, and asked if he could get away for 3 or 4 days. Swann said sure, and asked where they were going. Axelrod smiled at him and asked, "Have you ever seen a UFO?"
Holy shit!
That didn't mean to keep it sound outer spacey, didn't it? Do you hear that? That whistling sound?
The private jet landed a few hours later. Ingo Swann wasn't told where they were, but they had been flying due north for hours, so he assumed this was Alaska. It was the middle of the night and very dark and desolate. Mr. Axelrod, the twins, and Ingo Swann then climbed into an unmarked van. Swann was given a thermalized jumpsuit and asked to remove everything metal. They drove 2 hours through winding mountain roads before stopping under a group of pine trees. Axelrod said that it's very important that we're as quiet as possible. It's a 45-minute hike to their destination, and they can't talk or make any noise whatsoever. Swann nodded in agreement, and they ventured out into the wilderness. The twins were wearing what Swann thought to be night vision goggles because he could barely see a few feet in front of him. In fact, during some parts of the hike, he had to be led by the arm so he wouldn't fall into a creek or a hole or stumble over unsteady ground. They finally arrived at the edge of a lake, and Swann asked what he was supposed to do. Axelrod whispered that he should just observe in complete silence, and also to be as still as possible. Axelrod said they detect heat, noise, and motion like mad. Swann's eyes went wide, and he mouthed the word, "they?" Axelrod just brought his finger to his lips as if to say, "shh." So, the 4 men sat in silence for a long while until one of the twins made some kind of hand gesture. Axelrod said, "It's begun." At first, Swann didn't see anything, just a fog coming off the lake. But slowly the fog began to change. Swann said the fog was emitting light, at first neon blue, which slowly changed to what he called angry purple. The fog started getting thicker and thicker, and then up from the lake, a triangle-shaped craft emerged. It was about 90 feet wide and emitted a pulsing hum. Suddenly, beams of light were shooting from the craft, hitting different locations around the area. One of the twins whisper shouted, "We have to move." So they did. Then a beam of energy hit the area where the men were, and Swann remembers hearing a loud crack like lightning. And Swann was so stunned he couldn't move. He had to actually be dragged from the area. And Swann looked over his shoulder and saw water from the lake somehow being pulled into the craft. He described it as a reverse waterfall. And on the drive back, everyone was completely silent. Swann just stared out the window, trying to absorb everything he just saw, piece it together. When the van arrived at the airport, the sun was starting to come up. Swann said, "I finally know what's going on." Axelrod said, "Go on." Swann said confidently, "This was an unmanned drone." And Axelrod, like always, never confirmed or rejected Swann's ideas. He simply asked Swann to continue. Swann said, "It's a resupply mission. They're mining the moon and they need our water." Axelrod smiled at this. He didn't agree, but he didn't disagree either. Axelrod shook Swann's hand, thanked him, and gestured toward a waiting plane. Ingo Swann would be flying back alone. And he never saw Axelrod or the twins ever again. Ingo Swann kept his word and didn't speak of any of these events for years. He eventually published a full account of the story in his book Penetration, which I'll link below. It's a great book. Ingo Swann tells the story with a lot of flair. So if you're interested in stories like this, it's a must-read. But...
Oh, here we go.
But how much of the story is true?
I hate this part.
I know, but we have to do it.
Yeah, I know.
So let's break down Ingo Swann's story into its parts and see if we can figure out what really happened. We've got the Jupiter mission, the Moon mission, the extraterrestrial woman, and the UFO encounter. So let's start with the woman in the supermarket. Ingo Swann felt that this woman was an alien. He thought that maybe an alien or android made to look like an attractive woman was following him. Now, this was the chapter that was most difficult for me to believe.
So he didn't see a sexy E.T.?
I think he saw the woman, but she was probably human. He was under surveillance by the twins, who we now know to be CIA operatives. I think the most logical explanation is that she was a Soviet spy.
Honeypot!
Yeah, I think so. This was the 1970s, and during this time, the United States and Soviet Union were in the middle of what you might call a psychic arms race. We know this from CIA records. We also know that the US was full of Soviet spies. Next, the UFO encounter. This was another tough one for me. It was just a very tidy story. Mr. Axelrod knew exactly where it would appear, how it operated, what it would be doing. I mean, if he wanted Swann to confirm something about the craft, I think he could have done that remotely. I mean, if Ingo Swann could put his consciousness on Jupiter, he could certainly go to Alaska. And in his book, Swann describes light rays shooting from the UFO that actually destroyed pine trees and even killed animals. I think this is something that could be confirmed pretty easily, but there's no follow-up on it. Now, as for Jupiter, subsequent observations and probes to the planet confirmed a lot of what Ingo Swann said, and his discovery of Jupiter's rings is really a compelling story. We'd never seen those before, and they were confirmed by Voyager in 1979 and photographed by the New Horizons mission in 2007. Finally, the moon. And this is where things get really strange. The CIA had remote viewers projecting to Jupiter, Mars, and the moon. Even though the remote viewers' reports were highly classified, they're not any longer, and their reports are remarkably similar. The problem with the moon is that the US government simply will not allow us to confirm the details. There are reports of astronauts hearing signals coming from the moon, but those signals are dismissed as interference. We have pictures of what look like huge structures on the moon, but the pictures are fuzzy and can easily be refuted by skeptics as rock formations.
What about pictures of the far side of the moon?
Well, NASA has plenty of those, but they're very stingy with what they release to the public. And if NASA won't tell us what's happening up there, we're going to fill in the blanks ourselves. It's an indisputable fact that Ingo Swann was part of secret government experiments for years. If you search the CIA website, there are hundreds of documents that confirm this. And everyone who worked with Ingo Swann 100% believed he was telling the truth about everything he saw. Now, Swann admitted that he got things wrong plenty of times and was always reluctant to remote view places that couldn't be confirmed. So I don't think he's a liar or a fraud or a hoaxer, but did he really see the things he described? Only you can answer that. If you don't believe in remote viewing, then the answer is easy. No, none of this could be real. These are just stories created by someone with an incredible imagination. But if you do believe in remote viewing, as the US government certainly does, then Ingo Swann might have revealed the most important discovery of humankind, that we are not alone. The best stories are the ones that make you reevaluate everything you've been taught, that make you question every truth you've come to believe. The story of Ingo Swann is one of these. Now, after researching Ingo Swann, I'm left with more questions than answers. But if enough of us keep asking these questions, one day, maybe hundreds of years from now, or maybe tomorrow, we'll finally learn the truth. And the truth, whether fantastic or mundane, that's all we want.
3+1,5+0,0.
Now, while it's true that Ingo Swann did work for the CIA and did work for Project Stargate, there is no concrete evidence that he saw anything on the moon. But the next episode is the big one. It's the theory that the moon landing never happened, and it was just nothing more than a film directed by Stanley Kubrick. And you've heard me say the moon is weird a lot, and you're about to see a lot of evidence as to why. Stanley Kubrick is considered one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Of his 13 movies, a few are considered classics. But in 1968, Kubrick released 2001: A Space Odyssey. And this is more than a classic, it's a masterpiece, and widely regarded as one of the best science fiction films of all time, and probably the most influential. This collaboration with science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke tells the story of an alien intelligence that visited Earth in the distant past and left behind artifacts in the solar system. The movie features groundbreaking special effects which still hold up today. In fact, the effects looked so good that the movie gave the American government an idea. Billions of tax dollars were invested in the space program, but the Soviets were still years ahead of the United States. NASA desperately needed to get to the moon before Russia, but they knew it was impossible. So they turned to one of the world's best filmmakers for help. Because when it came to the moon, if they couldn't make it, They fake it. From the moment that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot on the moon on July 20th, 1969, rumors were circulating that the whole thing was faked.
That's because it was faked.
Yeah, I know you believe that.
I believe it because it's true.
Well, we're going to explore the theory, but
It's not a theory. The moon landing was fake.
Yeah, but can you be quiet for 1 minute while I set this up, please?
Fine. Go ahead. Set up your theory.
Thank you.
It was fake.
Science journalist Richard C. Hoagland wrote in his 2007 book Dark Mission that he saw NASA press officers helping distribute flyers to the press saying the landing was faked. Even though the astronauts brought back hundreds of moon rocks and took thousands of photographs of the moon, some people simply didn't believe it. Considering the technology of the time, going to the moon and back sounded like science fiction. At one point, almost 30% of the American public believed the moon landings had been faked, and this started to show up in pop culture. In the 1971 movie Diamonds Are Forever, there's a sequence where Sean Connery as James Bond breaks into a warehouse, and there he finds government agents filming a fake moon landing sequence. He steals a weird-looking moon buggy to escape.
Ugh, that thing is almost as ugly as the Tesla Cybertruck.
A few years later, the movie Capricorn 1, starring James Brolin and O.J. Simpson, was released.
Oh, did O.J. find the real killers yet?
Not yet.
Well, I'm sure they're hiding on a golf course out there somewhere.
And Capricorn 1 told the story of a fake mission to Mars.
As millions all over the world watched and listened, the President of the United States spoke to the astronauts across the vastness of space. There's only one small catch. It never happened. It's all a lie.
So because of these and other high-profile references, the idea of a fake moon landing conspiracy really took off in the 1970s.
Oh, the 70s had the best movies, the best music. You got a nice beaver. You know how to do it. Do-do-dee-doo-doo. Give me that nice beaver. You know how to show it.
What are you doing?
Yeah, that song's gonna be stuck in my head all day now. Oh, you don't remember that one by the Bee Gees? Nice Beaver?
Night fever.
No, Night Fever. That doesn't even make any sense. Well, what does he have, the flu? It's Nice Beaver.
It's not.
Well, if you spent as much time at Club 54 as I did, you know that Nice Beaver makes way more sense.
That may be, but the song is Night Fever.
Agree to disagree.
The conspiracy faded in the 80s, but the internet helped it make a comeback in the late 1990s. By the mid-2000s, the idea that the moon landings had been faked caught on with millennials who weren't alive for the Apollo missions. An extremely popular documentary was the Bart Sibrel film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon.
Oh, isn't that the guy that got punched out by Buzz Aldrin?
That's the guy.
You really like it?
You're the one who said you walked on the moon when you didn't. Calling the kettle black, if I ever thought of it. Saying I misrepresented myself.
Away from me.
You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
Ooh, that old timer can really throw hands, huh?
He sure could. But to be fair, Sibrel had been chasing Buzz around with a camera, badgering him to swear on the Bible that the moon landing was real. Buzz begged the guy to back off, which he didn't. Finally, Sibrel called him a liar and a coward, and he got a knuckle sandwich for his trouble. So the moon landing conspiracy was back, and popping up all over American pop culture.
And they just start making stuff up. Yeah. Like that Neil Armstrong guy. Have you seen him on the talk shows? Neil Armstrong? You mean the first man to walk on the moon? Talk about a fish story. Man, and they're buying it. Oh,
And when Joe Rogan started questioning the moon landing, that exposed the theory to a huge new audience.
Joe who?
Joe Rogan, comic, podcaster.
Between 1969 and 1972, they had seven attempts, 6 of them successful. That was the only time in history that a human being has been more than 400 miles above the Earth's surface.
Never heard of him.
400,000 people worked on the Apollo project. 600 million people watched the moon landing live. If this is a hoax, it's the greatest hoax in history. Bold claims require bold evidence. Is there evidence that the moon landing was faked? Lots of it.
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not
an 8-year-old's question. That's my question.
The motivation for faking the moon landings was driven by several factors. The United States was under tremendous pressure to get to the moon before the Soviets. The Soviet Union had already proven they were far ahead of the U.S. in space technology.
The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind.
The Soviet Union put the first man-made object in orbit with Sputnik 1 in 1957. They put the first animal in space when Laika the dog was launched with Sputnik 2. Laika didn't survive, but in 1960, the Soviets launched 2 dogs and a bunch of mice and rats that did return safely. The first human in space was Yuri Gagarin. Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman in space. The first multi-person crew, the first spacewalk, the first spacecraft to reach the moon, the first pictures of the far side of the moon, and even the first soft landing and transmission from the moon's surface. These were all Russian achievements. Meanwhile, America's attempts to catch up were not going well. Rumors started going around that the Russians were going to put nuclear weapons on the moon.
We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge.
So there was tremendous public pressure to get there first.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
On July 16th, 1969, Apollo 11 launched successfully. Four days later, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set foot on the moon.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
In just a few years, the United States went from being years behind the Soviets in space exploration to eclipsing all of their achievements. To many people, this was just too good to be true. So skeptics started poring over photographs and film looking for evidence of a hoax. And the evidence was everywhere. The first clue of a hoax was that the astronauts seemed to be casting shadows in 2 different directions. But the sun is the only light source on the moon. On Earth, shadows run parallel. On the moon, not only did shadows go in different directions, but sometimes they were at right angles to each other. The only way to explain this is multiple light sources, like you'd get on a movie soundstage. Studio lights would also explain this shot. In a vacuum with only a single light source, the shadows on the moon should be absolutely, completely black. But there's a lot of film and photos where, even though the astronauts are in shadow, they're lit extremely well. Now, in the movies, the sun would be called a key light, which is your main light. And this light in the shadows would be from what's called a fill light. But there's no fill light on the moon, only a key light, the sun. There seems to be a Hollywood lighting technique happening here. Now, you're not going to find any direct evidence of studio lights in any pictures from the moon. NASA's too smart for that. But even in big-budget movies, you can sometimes see the cameras and lights in reflections. Now look at this. In the reflection on the helmet, it looks like a neat row of movie lights. And look at the reflection on this photo.
What the heck is that?
That looks a lot like a studio light with the barn doors open. Now here's a photo that shows what looks like a movie prop. This rock is labeled with the letter C, but the crew forgot to remove the label when they started shooting. How about this picture of the landing module? Do those hills look like they're miles away? Or do they look like this was shot on a soundstage? Now, speaking of those hills, this photo was supposedly taken a few miles away from the landing module. Then how come the backgrounds are identical?
Because they use the same backdrop.
Now let's talk about stars. On Earth, even with our thick atmosphere, the sky looks like this. But on the moon, with no air, the sky is just black? Shouldn't the sky be full of stars? NASA really thought this one through. If you're going to hoax something in space, the stars are a big problem. This is because by using a star map, you can not only get the precise location a photo was taken, you can even get the precise day and time. So they had to get rid of the stars.
When you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
Small problem. They use stars to help them navigate to the moon.
The astronaut navigator finds a known star in the wide-angle telescope. Using a fingertip control, he changes the attitude of the spacecraft to bring the star into line. Once he has the star in position in the telescope, he moves the optical sextant. He lines the sextant up with the star and makes a reading.
So are there stars or not? Which is it? There's a lot of evidence stacking up that doesn't look good for NASA or the moon landing. And we're just warming up.
NASA and the government faked the moon landing was basically, it was technically impossible to do it. And they simply had to come up with some sort of alternative that they felt the public would believe.
I believe, had they wanted to, that NASA could indeed have pulled off the greatest hoax of all time, never sent anyone to the moon, and recreated it in a television studio.
Can you realize that you and I, that all of us, have actually begun the exploration of another world?
The United States Geological Survey decided to build a model of one part of the lunar surface in an area accessible to present research centers.
4, 3, 2, 1, fire!
Reflections of studio lights, accidental movie props, repeating backdrops. There's a lot of evidence suggesting that the moon landing wasn't filmed on the moon, but on a soundstage. The lunar module engine puts out 3,000 pounds of thrust, and the lunar surface is covered with dust that was described as fine powder. If that's true, why did the engine leave no mark on the surface? And shouldn't there be dust everywhere? Even the footpads are clean and shiny. So either the landing module was sitting there, or it was gently lowered down by a crane. And you'd have to lower the thing gently. Look at it. It looks like tinfoil and curtain rods held together by duct tape. More evidence that a crane was used is when the astronauts separate from the module and return to orbit for pickup. Look at this. The module separates and the astronauts gently lift back to orbit. And look how slowly it moves. Where's the rocket plume from the engine? What's allowing this to fly all the way to orbit? If you watch the footage closely, it looks like the object is wobbling a little on cables or wires. By the way, who shot this footage? There was no camera remote control, but somehow the scene is framed perfectly. They're zooming in and out. The camera tracks the object up into the sky, but conveniently loses the object when it gets too high. But the camera does pan around the surface. Who's working the camera? Now, speaking of cables and wires, look at this footage. Does this look natural? Or does it look like he's being lifted by wires?
Houston, Apollo 11, how do you read? Apollo 11, this is Houston. Go ahead.
LEM looks to be in pretty fine shape. About all we can see from here.
Okay, in reference to your question on this step 13 on the decal, I understand that you have used up the contents of the repressed O2 package, and at that time, instead of being...
Then there's this footage of Neil and Buzz putting up the American flag. But if they were both on the moon's surface, who's shooting the footage? And how is the flag waving if there's no atmosphere on the moon? Now, sure, we've been told that there was an aluminum tube holding up the flag, but it seems to be moving around a lot. Now, here's a picture of what an Apollo astronaut spacesuit looked like. But look at the soles of the shoes. They don't look anything like the footprints the astronauts supposedly made in the lunar dust. And what about the heat? The surface temperature on the moon during the day is over 250 degrees Fahrenheit. That's as hot as an oven. The film inside their cameras should have melted. But there are thousands of pictures that all came out perfectly fine.
Well, fine, except for the whole wrong shadows, no stars, movie props, visible lights, and stuff being hoisted by cranes.
Right, except for that. And there are plenty of photos that are flat out doctored. If you remember our episode on NASA's Mars cover-up, we proved that the photos of Mars were altered before being released to the public. This is a technique perfected during Apollo. The Apollo handheld cameras had special crosshairs on them called Rousseau marks. And these were here to help make sure the photos were printed properly from the negatives and not distorted, and to make it easier to stitch photos together for panoramas. But in some of the photos, the crosshairs aren't there, or are only in part of the picture. In other photographs, objects appear in front of the crosshairs. Now that's physically impossible, unless the objects were added after the photo was taken, by layering them on top of empty backgrounds. And there are even more problems with the photography. Here's a picture of an Apollo astronaut saluting the American flag. But look at his feet. The shadows don't even reach them. It's like he was edited in later and somebody forgot to add a shadow. Now, even if we could explain all these anomalies in the photos, there's a big reason why nobody can get to the moon. A reason why human beings can't leave Earth at all, at least not yet. The reason is real and scientifically proven as fact. Radiation.
We see the ascent stage suddenly pop up without any exhaust plume whatsoever, as though it were jerked up by a cable.
Our research suggests that images of the Apollo landings are not a true and accurate record. In our view, the Apollo pictures were faked. Many of the images are replete with inconsistencies and anomalies.
There are problems with almost every aspect of the visual records, equipment, and technology used to supposedly put a man on the moon. But there's one even bigger problem we haven't dealt with yet. There's no way the astronauts could have even escaped Earth's orbit, much less gone to the moon and back. Radiation. In 1958, scientist James Van Allen discovered two enormous belts of high-energy radiation surrounding the planet. The Van Allen radiation belts are a pair of toroidal belts donut-shaped belts of high-energy particles. Any object leaving the Earth's orbit to visit the moon or beyond has to pass through them, and they extend out about 37,000 miles from Earth. These two radiation belts have different compositions. The inner belt above the equator contains energetic particles that are charged up to 100 million electron volts. The outer belt is electron plasma from the sun's solar wind, and it has energies in the 10 million electron volt range. When it was first detected, the strength of the radiation was so powerful that scientists thought they had recorded a Soviet nuclear test. These high-energy particles can penetrate spacecraft, damage instruments, and are lethal to astronauts. But we have photos and even film of the Earth taken from much farther out. How could this be faked? Well, the astronauts never left low Earth orbit. From there, the Earth fills the entire window of the craft.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with the TV camera, so your view now is probably better than ours is.
So to get this film of the Earth, they blocked out sections of the window. This film is an outtake. The astronauts didn't realize they were still rolling. They said the camera was pressed up against the window to get a good shot of the Earth, but that's not true. You can see someone pass in front of the window, then quickly jump out of the way. And here you see the dim work light that was used so they could operate the camera. We're not supposed to see this. We're also not supposed to see this. Someone adjusting the insert that controls the shape of the Earth. Now remember, they're in low Earth orbit, so the Earth is actually really bright and fills the whole window. How do we know? Because when they open up the iris of the lens, we can see it.
Holy sh**.
Yeah, we can't pass through the Van Allen belts yet. Don't take my word for it. Take NASA's.
As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space.
I guess we're still working on solving this issue? Because I thought
But we're also really pushing the boundaries in terms of where we're going forward with exploration. I think humans are naturally driven to do this, and this is really the beginning, I think, of human beings leaving low Earth orbit. I certainly plan on being around to see that.
I don't want to be a jerk because she seems like a nice girl, but newsflash, the moon is way outside low Earth orbit.
The plan that NASA has is to build a rocket called SLS, which is a heavy lift rocket. It's something that is much bigger than what we have today, and it will be able to launch the Orion capsule with humans on board, as well as landers or other components to destinations beyond Earth orbit. Right now, we only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to, and we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually.
Once we travel beyond low Earth orbit, the crew will be exposed to larger amounts of radiation. So we have to design both the crew protection systems and our electronic systems to withstand this radiation.
But didn't we already design those protection systems for Apollo? Why don't we just use that technology?
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
Wait, we destroyed the technology and we can't recreate it? So nobody wrote anything down? That seems irresponsible.
Oh, you mean irresponsible, like recording over the original moon landing tapes?
Yeah, NASA did that. There are no original high-quality moon landing tapes. They were erased and reused.
Allegedly.
The footage we see of the moon landing was taken in a very strange way. NASA took a video feed from the moon and projected it onto a screen. Then TV stations pointed their cameras at the screen. The stations wanted a direct feed, but NASA refused. That's why the moon landing footage is such a mess. Anyway, the best way to protect a fragile human body from Van Allen radiation is lead shielding. But even a thin layer of lead would have made the Saturn V rocket too heavy to get off the ground. The only protection they had was a thin sheet of aluminum. But aluminum melts at about 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. The electrons in the Van Allen belts have energies of millions of volts. Now, this would equate to a temperature of about 10 million degrees Kelvin. So how did NASA overcome this problem? They didn't. Instead, they called Hollywood.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space.
But right now, we need a 10 to 12-year program that has as its ultimate goal the man domination of space. And if we don't, we're going to be in trouble.
To put people on the moon and with enough fuel to enable them to return safely home to Earth requires a still larger and more powerful rocket, however.
A member of Congress said today that he was tired of seeing the United States second to Russia in the space field.
And only the future will tell whether we'll manage to close that gap.
It's going to take some time, and I think we have to recognize it. They secured these large boosters, which have led to their being first in Sputnik and led to their first putting their man in space. We are, I hope, going to be able to carry out our efforts with due regard to the problem of the life of the man involved this year. But we are behind.
Kubrick's Odyssey is a short film created by Jay Weidner in 2011. Recently, it gained attention after being picked up by the Gaia streaming network. This film is the primary reference for the theory that Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing footage for NASA in the 1960s and 70s. By 1964, NASA knew that sending men to the moon was impossible. The deadly radiation belts, issues with chemical rockets, and weight and radiation shielding issues, it made it unachievable. Kubrick became involved when someone in the Pentagon saw his 1963 film, Dr. Strangelove. Impressed by the special effects, this person offered Kubrick a secret project, faking the Apollo moon landings. Kubrick was persuaded using a carrot and stick approach. If he helped fake the landings, he would have artistic freedom and financial support for his future films. That's the carrot. The stick was blackmail.
No one knows how the powers that be convinced Kubrick to direct the Apollo landings. Maybe they had compromised Kubrick in some way. The fact that his brother, Raoul Kubrick, was the head of the American Communist Party may have been one of the avenues pursued by the government to get Stanley to cooperate.
So a deal was made in 1964. Kubrick was given 3 years to complete 2001 in order to test the filmmaking technology necessary to make the moon landings appear believable. To assist him, he had access to several NASA experts and the use of a special 50mm lens made specifically for the Apollo program.
Originally was a lens manufactured, designed, developed, and manufactured by Zeiss for NASA.
So how did he do it? Without the use of CGI, Kubrick perfected a new kind of visual effect called front screen projection. Experimentation with front screen projection began in 1949, shortly after the invention of Scotchlight, a material used for screens in movie theaters. Scotchlight is cloth embedded with millions of tiny glass beads that have high reflectivity. Due to the sensitivity of Scotchlight, a minimal amount of light is required. This means that actors can stand in front of the projection without it being visible on their bodies or clothing. Front screen projection was so convincing that many people think the Dawn of Man sequences in 2001 were actually shot on location. They weren't. Almost all that part of 2001 was shot in a studio with actors on sets. If you look closely at Apollo photographs of the moon, you can see a line where the fake moon set ends and the front projection screen begins. At that line, the texture of the lunar surface changes dramatically.
Please note how everything is in focus, from the rocks and pebbles close to the camera, all the way to the crystal clear mountain behind the astronaut. There is a stark difference in ground texture between the set and what is being projected onto the screen. You can almost count the number of small rocks and the granularity of the ground that is clearly seen on the set. Once we get to the screen on the other side of my line, this granularity disappears. The little pebbles and dust just seem to disappear behind my line.
The latter part of Kubrick's Odyssey discusses the hidden messages in The Shining that Kubrick directed in 1980. Kubrick leaves clues that he faked the moon landings. The characters Jack and Danny, who are the father and son in the movie, symbolize different aspects of Kubrick's own personality. Danny, the child, represents Kubrick's inner innocence, while Jack represents the jaded and morally compromised adult that Kubrick has become. There are also specific visual clues. The Indian wall hangings on the walls of the Overlook Hotel look like rockets launching into space. The pattern on the carpet of the hotel is a hexagonal shape that represents the shape of the launch pads at Cape Canaveral. And in one scene, when Danny is playing with his toys on this carpet, he stands up and is seen wearing a sweater that says Apollo 11 on it. Next, there's a scene where Danny then walks down the hall and finds an open door to a room. The room is number 237, which was changed from room 217 in the Stephen King novel. The number 237 is significant because the average orbital distance between the Earth and the Moon is 237,000 miles. Then there's the scene where Jack's wife discovers that he's been typing the same phrase over and over. The phrase is, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. But the word all isn't A-L-L. It's actually typed out as A-11 or Apollo 11. And there are a lot of other claims made by Kubrick's Odyssey, but those are the highlights. And these claims were highly debated and very controversial. What we need is Kubrick admitting he faked the moon landing. We need to hear it from his own mouth, but he never said a word about it. Or did he?
We've been brought in here by Stanley Kubrick to more or less ensure the scientific integrity of the film, to make sure that it's very, very close in reality, but still we want to make certain that it has a base of reality.
We're in the final assembly building of the LEM. Stanley Kubrick and I have set ourselves several objectives. We hope to convey to the public the wonder and beauty and promise of the new age of exploration which is opening up before the human race.
Take one. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Good evening.
I'm sorry not to be able to be with you tonight.
In 2016, an interview with Stanley Kubrick was found. And according to the video, Kubrick had to sign an 88-page non-disclosure agreement that the interview would stay hidden for 15 years.
Is everything looking in order regarding our contract and the 15-year agreement, and I signed the non-disclosure? That's all for the legal stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Looks good to me.
All right.
A documentary filmmaker interviews Stanley Kubrick about his career as a director. And right from the start, Kubrick interrupts and explains that when he initially considered the project, he saw it as just another film. When asked which of his movies he's referring to, he reveals that he's talking about the moon landing and claims that it was all fake.
The challenge of making this film, and I went into it like it was a regular film, like another production of mine, not thinking too much about the long-term effects, what it would mean to society if it was ever discovered.
Mm-hmm. What are you talking about? I don't even know what you're talking about. You're referring to something?
The fake moon landing.
He says that he was approached by NASA and that they appealed to his sense of duty and patriotism. But Kubrick admitted that the project was about America's public image and upstaging Russia.
To fulfill this dream that America has had as a country since the Kennedy years.
Okay, so you're saying the motivation was PR?
PR, absolutely. Plain and simple, PR.
Then he goes on to confirm that the conspiracy is actually the truth.
Faking the exploration of space, because there was just no way we could get there.
NASA then set up a meeting with Kubrick and President Richard Nixon. Kubrick met with Nixon in the Oval Office and details what Nixon asked him to do: film a fake moon landing.
I am convinced, and the gentlemen at NASA are also convinced, that you can help us make people believe that we have been to the moon.
This interview was a bombshell. This was the evidence the world had been waiting for. This was evidence that every allegation made in the documentary Kubrick's Odyssey was true.
Yep.
Millions of people saw this interview and finally felt justified in their suspicion that the moon landing never happened.
Yep.
One small problem.
No.
That wasn't Stanley Kubrick.
No.
The Stanley Kubrick moon landing confession set the conspiracy side of the internet on fire, but it was a hoax. This is either a filmmaker and an actor, or more likely, two guys goofing around. In the full-length version of the interview, an agitated producer constantly badgers the actor whose real name is Tom.
A launch pad accident in '67, which killed...
Tom, you're going to tell me a story. So Nixon sat me down in the Oval Office, and he says to me, you know, that boy just died. I don't think, this is how I want you... Then we're going to kneel. We're going to kneel. Yeah.
The plan. He didn't... Yeah.
So he says to me, you don't say he said anything. You say what he says, okay? That's all, Tom, I'm just giving you a direction.
Wait, you want me...
Everything about, I walked in and he said...
You want me to say it as him, or do you want...
You don't have to imitate him, but you have to say it. He says, Stanley, we've worked on this moon program. You're not...
Come on, get with it, Tom.
Do your shtick. Do a shtick. Get in the fact that you're writing this, Tom, and not everything's got to be drab. It can be funny in a very subtle way. So you meet with Nixon, and what happened? Grab a drink. And action.
What they believed was, if we could...
Nixon sat down. Color, tell me a story, Tom.
So Stanley Kubrick had nothing to do with that interview. Not just that, he had nothing to do with the moon landing. In the documentary Kubrick's Odyssey, everything can be explained. All the photo evidence presented is from extremely low-resolution photos, probably grabbed from the web. Now, unfortunately for the documentary, but lucky for us, high-resolution photos can be found easily. So when looking at a low-resolution photo of the lunar landscape, you can maybe see a separation between the foreground and the supposed backdrop. But in the high-res photos, the line isn't there. All the other claims in the documentary that refer to photos can be explained simply by looking at the originals. As far as the clues left in The Shining, those are nothing but coincidences and stretches of the imagination. The rockets in the tapestry, I don't really see it. The hexagonal rug? Well, the launch pad at Cape Canaveral is not a hexagon. It was roughly 10 sides, but it's not very symmetrical. Room 237 is just room 237. The moon isn't 237,000 miles away from the Earth. It's closer to 239,000, but varies slightly. Danny is indeed wearing an Apollo 11 sweater. But Stanley Kubrick was a space nut. He loved the Apollo program, and he loved sci-fi. And Stanley Kubrick's brother Paul, who was the leader of the Communist Party, well, that's not true at all. Kubrick didn't have a brother. So that documentary is debunked.
Well, maybe debunked, maybe not.
No, it's debunked. It is.
Yeah, agree to disagree. Yeah, but there's still a lot of stuff in those pictures that looks really fishy.
Well, that's true. The big one is that the shadows should be parallel. Since the shadows are not parallel, there must be other light sources. Except shadows aren't parallel. The direction of shadows depends on the perspective of the viewer. Now here's an example on Earth. These are two pictures of the same woman, taken at different angles. In the first photo, taken from the side, the shadows are parallel. But when we put our back to the sun, the shadows aren't even close to parallel. In perspective drawing and design, parallel lines converge in what's called a vanishing point. This is typically the horizon line where objects vanish beyond our field of view. Plus, the astronauts used very wide lenses to capture as much terrain as possible. So images are going to be slightly distorted, like a carnival mirror. But even with a flatter lens, or the human eye, shadows are not parallel. Also, multiple light sources would cast multiple shadows. But the objects on the moon cast only one shadow.
Yeah, but everything in the shadow is supposed to be black because there's no light getting there.
Sure there is.
No, there isn't.
There is.
Agree to disagree.
The ambient light, or the fill light, is the moon itself. The soil on the surface of the moon is full of tiny beads of glass and metal like aluminum and titanium. These are all highly reflective materials. So the moon's soil actually acts like trillions of tiny mirrors, bouncing the light back and filling in the shadows.
Yeah.
Well, ever go skiing on a sunny day?
Of course I have. I was an instructor in college.
I don't want to get into that now. Anyway, you can get a pretty bad sunburn skiing. Not from the sun overhead, but by the sun reflecting off the snow. You could actually burn your cornea with reflected ultraviolet sunlight. It's called snow blindness. So shadows and multiple light sources, that's all debunked. Now, the same background theory might be my favorite because it really defies explanation.
Aha!
Until we look more closely.
Oh.
The backgrounds do not line up perfectly. They're slightly off because the photos were taken pretty far apart. The hills in the distance look the same because they're the same. Those hills are miles away. But since there's no atmosphere on the moon... Well, since there's no water vapor on the moon... Okay, there's an atmosphere on the moon, but it's extremely thin compared to the Earth. It's called an exosphere, and it's made up of very small amounts of hydrogen, helium, and a few trace gases. And because there's no atmosphere, there's no haze. We evolved on Earth with a thick atmosphere, and one of the ways we determine distant objects is by how hazy they are. In other words, how much of the atmosphere are we looking through? Now, on the moon, without haze, objects both near and far will feel close. It's an optical illusion.
Yeah, but where are the stars?
Right. The stars are there, you just can't see them.
Yeah, likely story.
Well, in order to take pictures of the moon, the camera's iris had to be almost completely closed and shutter speed turned way up. This is to let in as little light as possible. Otherwise, the brightness of the moon would wash everything out. Look how bright a full moon is. On a clear night, a full moon lights up everything, and it's 250,000 miles away. The astronauts are standing on that. It's bright. Even on Earth, if you're standing under a big spotlight at night, you're not going to see stars. The iris of your eye acts like the iris of a camera. The faint light of the stars just doesn't register. Watch a baseball game played under the lights. You don't see stars. Now, a lot of moon hoax evidence is cherry-picked, like the lack of a blast crater under the lunar module. There's no crater because the engine was turned off about 10 feet from the surface. The LEM just dropped the rest of the way. And without any wind to disturb, there's just not going to be a lot of dust flying around. And where Apollo 11 touched down, the ground was hard soil. But other Apollo landings like Apollo 12 were pretty dusty. The lack of wind is also why the American flag doesn't move.
Well,
the aluminum rods are pretty springy, so the flag moves for quite a while after it's touched. But when it settles down, it doesn't move an inch. Oh, the camera that recorded the lunar module separating? That was operated remotely. The footprints don't match because the astronauts put on boot covers that have a different tread. The temperatures are hot on the moon, but without an atmosphere to conduct heat, there's no convection. As long as things are colored bright white, They reflect most of the sun's energy pretty well. Heat wasn't an issue, not for the astronauts and not for the camera film. Now, there are many more examples, but I think you get the idea. Every single one of those pieces of evidence can be explained. But hold on a second.
Go on.
2 questions. Did NASA put men on the moon? Probably. Is NASA covering something up on the moon? Definitely.
My name is Carl Wolf, and I was a precision electronics photographic repairman with a top secret crypto clearance. In mid-1965, I was loaned to the Lunar Orbiter project at NASA on Langley Field. I was taken into the laboratory where the equipment was malfunctioning. I couldn't repair it in the dark. I asked to have it removed. Airman second class was in the dark room at that time. I was also an airman second class. About 30 minutes into the process, he said to me, in a very distressed way, by the way, we've discovered a base on the backside of the moon. And then he proceeded to put photographs down in front of me, and clearly in these photographs were structures, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical buildings, and towers. And at that point, I was very concerned because I knew we were working on compartmentalized security. He had breached security, and I was actually frightened at that moment. And I did not question him any further. And a few moments later, someone did come into the room. I worked there for 3 more days, and I remember going home and naively thinking, I can't wait to hear about this on the evening news. And here it is, more than 30 years later, and I hope we hear about it tonight. And I will testify under oath before Congress that what I'm saying is the truth.
I think the reason we haven't returned to the moon for 50 years is not because of a lack of interest or funding or the Van Allen radiation belts. I think we haven't gone back to the moon because of what was found up there. But that requires its own episode, and if you want to see it, let me know. Whatever is up there has been up there for a long, long time. And I think we can prove it. Thank you so much for hanging out today. My name is AJ. That's Hecklefish.
What's a crack-a-lackin'?
This has been a Y-Files compilation episode, and I hope you learned some new things or at least had some fun. Now, remember, the Y-Files is also a podcast. It's called the Y-Files Operation Podcast, and there we post deep dives on all the subjects we cover here on the channel. I usually post about twice a week, and often those episodes are topics that wouldn't be allowed on the channel, and those are called unredacted. Anyway, the podcast is called the Y-Files Operation Podcast, and it's available everywhere. Now, if you want to make a few new friends, check out the Y-Files Discord. There are over 50,000 people on there, so 24/7, there's someone to talk to about one of the weird topics that we cover here on the channel. It's a fun community, it's a supportive community, and it's absolutely free to join, so check it out. If you want to know what's going on with the Y-Files, check out our production calendar. It's at theyfiles.com/cal, and there we post our episode schedule, live streams, podcasts, compilations like this, even meetups, all that stuff is there. Special thanks to our Patreon members who keep this channel going. I could not be more grateful for your support. And we should all be very proud of the community that we've created. And honestly, the credit goes to you. You guys are amazing. And if you'd like to support the channel and become part of this community, you can join Patreon for as little as $3 a month, and you get all kinds of cool perks like access to videos early with no commercials, a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, merch only available to members, plus you get 2 extra live streams every week just for you. And the live streams are fun. You get to meet the whole Y-Files team. All of our webcams are on. You can turn your camera on, hop up on stage, talk to us, ask a question, suggest a topic. You don't have to turn your camera on. You can just use your audio, or you can just lurk in the crowd. Plenty of people do that. Anyway, it's a great way to get to know us personally, and I think it's the best Patreon perk there is. Another great way to support the channel is grab something from the Y-Files store.
Well, now sure, you can get a Hecklefish t-shirt or a Fistable coffee mug or one of these squeezy stuffed toy animal fish dolls. But if you love your country, you'll support the Hecklefish for President campaign. Thank you for watching. God bless you, and may God bless these United States.
That was nice.
Did it sound sincere? You think people will buy it?
Do I think they'll buy that you're sincere?
No, you idiot. They think they'll buy my campaign merch.
We'll see.
Vote for me, and there'll be a crab cat in every pot.
Okay, enough plugging. We already played the commercial.
Did I mention the melted butter?
Anyway, that's gonna do it. Until next time, be safe, be kind, and know that you are appreciated. 'Cause you are.
In Area 51, a secret code inside the Bible said I would. I love my UFOs and paranormal fun, as well as music, so I'm singing it like I should. But then another conspiracy theory becomes the truth, my friends, and it never ends. No, it never ends. I feel the crap cat and got stuck inside Mel's hole with MK Ultra. I'm being only too aware. Did Stanley Kubrick fake the moon landing alone on a film set, or were the shadow people there? The Roswell aliens just fought the smiling man, I'm told, and his name was Cold. And I can't believe I'm dancing with the fish. Heckelfish on Thursday nights with AJ2, and the Wi-Fi's happening all through the night. All I ever wanted was to just hear the truth, so the Wi-Fi's on repeat all through the night. The Mothman sightings and the solar storm still come to Agatha, the secret city underground. Mysterious number stations, planet Earth 02, Project Stargate, and what the Dark Watchers found. We're in a simulation, don't you worry though. The Black Knight satellite, it's over.